Welcome, Wargamers, to the dark underlayers of the mortal realms, because today we are talking about the iconic Skaven. Quite possibly the most iconic property, at least within the fantasy verse, I would say, that GW has, adored by many, beloved by all. They are front and center in this new edition, being included in the core starter set, the Skaven Tide box, and then like all the subsequent smaller boxes that come out afterwards. And with the release of their battle tome, it is our first glimpses into the 4th edition of Age of Sigmar, what that means for armies and stuff going forward, for storytelling opportunities, but also for a renewed vision on the Skaven within the Age of Sigmar universe. So what I'd like to do in this series is reintroduce ourselves to the Skaven. Who are they? What do they want? Where do they fit into the greater chaos kind of faction now that everything was shaken up with the Skaven Doom? We're going to explore all of this and the unit lore this week on 2 Plus Tough, because a lot of big changes have happened. Now, one thing I'd like to add right up top, if you're interested in this video, this faction, this game, please consider using any of the affiliate links in my description down below. Using those links saves you money, and every single time you do at no cost, it goes directly to supporting me, my wife, our cats, the whole channel. And also, I wanted to throw a shout out there that I have 2 Plus Tough dice now available through Baron of Dice, which is an awesome business. They're so fun to work with. So if you want to support the channel and also another small business in our community, head over to Baron of Dice in the link in my link tree down below and get yourself a set. They roll 6s 1/6 of the time, every time. Secondly, as this new edition is unraveling before us and now data is coming in, if you want to learn more about Age of Sigmar, the gameplay side of things, head on over to Goonhammer. They have fantastic content for both talking about the game conceptually, painting models, build guides, that kind of stuff. If you want to know about it, it's on Goonhammer. And their boy Campbell has actually started doing YouTube videos for Goonhammer, so also go check out their YouTube channel. Okay, so for those of you who are new to the Age of Sigmar setting, or maybe even just the faction, the Skaven are a race of rat men that seek to wreck the realms until they are desolate husks that only these rats can play in. They are nearly innumerable, they breed like crazy, they can dig up from underground, and more. They really are a scourge of the realms, and it's all in service to their personal deity, the Great Horned Rat. But until now, in terms of the grand narrative of things we've been following, the previous major story arcs of Age of Sigmar, they've been relatively tame. I'm gonna put that word in bold, relatively tame. They have forts, warlords, armies. They work in service of one another and hire and are hired by other chaos forces. But I think we can all agree, right, that detonating a chunk of a continent and parking your corner of unreality up to that hole is maybe a step beyond. So it is worth starting our exploration of the Skaven, and I want to do this from the top down. And so in today's video, we're going to introduce the Great Horned Rat, because this battle tome has done more to flesh out the Great Horned Rat as a character than any battle tome before. I just think it does a better job. There is this wonderful little sidebar, like a missive that was scribbled by some human, and it's essentially like 2 scholars trying to discern the deity of the Skaven god from their little chittering and what they understand of the Skaven tongue. Essentially, what is their internal mythos that brought them from the old world, the setting previous to Age of Sigmar. And in that narrative, from what they gather, the Great Horned Rat gathered up Skaven blight into its bosom and then essentially launched into nothingness along with the world that was. Along the way, to survive, the Great Horned Rat devoured its own children for sustenance, like rats do, and the Skaven that we see today are descendants of the survivors that the Great Horned Rat had shepherded into the mortal realms. Now, it's important to put a huge asterisk there that that's not a fact. That's what these scholars are piecing together through 2 Skaven's dialogue, which honestly, when it comes to forces that are alien to us, I think is the most fascinating way to do storytelling. Don't take it at face value, but just tell me what they think is going on. I guess technically this is what they think the Skaven think, but you know what I mean. It's so much more fun than just third person fact-splaining everything. But there's a lot more going on than just being, a race from the old world that was brought forward. Because more than just how the Skaven got here, this battle tome, in no uncertain terms, I'm going to make that very clear, in no uncertain terms, solidifies the Great Horned Rat as a Chaos God. The events of the Skaven Doom have launched him in power and superiority up to the tier the 4 are now 5. And if you think to yourself, that's a bunch of garbage, remember, all the Chaos Gods still fawn over an 8-pointed Chaos Star. It's a whole thing. The numbers don't matter. He's up there. I'm not a mathematician. And it's not just like oh yeah, he's cool. They actually invested a lot of information into making him feel like he belongs amongst the other Chaos Gods in the Pantheon. And here's what I mean by that. In this book, the Great Horned Rat has a mortal emotion that he feeds on. That emotion is desperation. And I'll be honest, I did not see that coming. And for folks who are new to Age of Sigmar and GW stuff, whatever, the short version is that the Chaos Gods in this fiction feed on emotions that you and I feel. When we feel things, it's kind of projected into another dimension, what you and I would call the realm of chaos. When one emotion becomes dominant, it can kind of take a crude form and intelligence, what we would call demons. And so that's how we have Khorne, the god of bloodshed and murder and rage, all those emotions pulled together and made Khorne. Nurgle is decay and entropy and despair. And this book posits that the Great Horned Rat is a chaos god of desperation. I'm going to read to you an insert that I think does a phenomenal job. If you are the writer at GW who did this, chef's kiss to you. And I quote, "The Horned Rat draws strength from the present who devours their family rather than starve. The preacher made a lord through prophesying an oncoming disaster. The child who topples their siblings' work out of a need for attention. He is what mortals become in their most despicable moments, self-serving vermin. It is hardly a surprise, then, that he is so bound to the fortunes of his Skaven brood who revel in such deviousness. The black hunger suffered by all Skaven is an echo of the Horned Rat's own need to consume. Combined with the Ratmen's explosive fecundity, the environment in their warren cities is therefore one of constant scarcity. Skaven must claw for scraps of prestige, tearing down all others. Only the most powerful have enough meager security to potentially reflect on their society's sickness. But so too have they been twisted by it, their master forever whispering both glory and threats in their mind." I adore this so much that I can't stand it. It's a nice fresh take, it fits into the context of everything, how chaos and demons work and all of that. It's the personification of you at your worst, most selfish moment, but on the scale of billions of individuals. He wanted to be one of the 4 for a long time, the Great Horned Rat that is, but Skaven souls, as it's illustrated in this book, shine very dimly in the realm of chaos. So he kind of lacked the chaos juice to kind of excel himself or thrust himself into that pantheon of the 4. Well, when the Skaven Doom went off, that huge explosion across Akshi, his moment to ascend didn't come from the blowing up of a mountain, although that was rad and super important. It came because that boom made a whole continent of people, the whole realm of Akshi, become their most desperate, selfish selves in one loud crescendo. All over the realms, Skaven poured out of their cities to attack. In every corner of the realms, Ratmen were everywhere, digging up from underneath the city, flooding the walls from outside. And all over, there was therefore a desperate defense. There was prophets instilling fear into the masses and so on. As far as a chaos god really, hitting their own note to grow in power, this was really good. And one of the things that's cool, right, as people were debating whether or not the Great Horned Rat is now one of the 4 Chaos Gods, the 5 now, the book actually then takes a moment to say that not only is this happening in the mortal realms, but that the ascendancy of the Great Horned Rat is happening in the realm of chaos as well. The realm of chaos as we know it is, again, this kind of like emotional plane. It's kind of outside of what we would know as physics and stuff like that. But it's dominated by 4 vast kingdoms, right? The kingdoms of the original 4 pantheon of chaos gods. And what's happened since the Skaven Doom is that a black corruption began to kind of permeate all corners of them. All the edges of their realms started to have this kind of like corruption and infection. This was the Great Horned Rat securing for himself his own kingdom in the realm of chaos. It doesn't exist in its own, unified sense like the others, but it exists in the shadows of all others, but collectively takes up 1/5 of the space. And this happened for a few reasons, because the other 4, Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh, still see this as a continuation of their great game. And so rather than like unifying the 4 against the Great Horned Rat, all of them want to use him for their own purposes. So for example, Khorne's like, I could squish these little rat men anytime I want to, but what if I teamed up with them to punch Tzeentch as hard as I could, and we'll knock him down a peg, and once that's done, I'll take care of the rat men. Like, all of them have that same idea, and the Great Horned Rat, as this manipulator of their desperate need to act as a supreme force to another, lets him have a lot of opportunities. My point in saying all of this is, like, not only does the book clearly assert that the 4 are now 5, and that the Great Horned Rat is a true chaos god tier character, but they went through and made it interesting. Like, I found this book interesting to learn about the Great Horned Rat, and I counter that to saying I don't find Gorka Morka nearly as interesting to learn about in the Ironjaw stuff. It's always a very vague thing. The Bad Moon is more fun to learn about in the Gitz book than Gorka Morka as a god is in most of the Destruction tomes. This paints the Skaven deity as an interesting and active character that has refreshed its kind of, stage within the realms. And it's an interesting and compelling story. Now, one of the other things I wanted to touch on as we're talking about the Great Horned Rat and how they manifest in the realms and stuff like that, it's important to note that he also has probably the most stable gateway between realms amongst the 5 chaos gods. And this is something that always made the Skaven interesting on a micro level, but it just got way bigger. And I'm going to explain this for folks who are new to the game. The Skaven have the ability to essentially kind of create wormholes through reality. We call them gnaw holes. It's just like mining a tunnel, but it can connect vast distances without necessarily going from point A to point B. If you're a 40K fan, think of the webway, but imagine it being very rickety. It's imprecise. There's actually a great deal of stories about how the Skaven accidentally tunnel into the wrong places and it just goes haywire. One time they tunneled into the bottom of a lake in Shyish and they drained the entire lake, which revealed an Ideneth enclave at one point. It's really funny. But they've always had this unique thing as being able to, like rats, dig and burrow into places that everyone thought were well defended and totally safe. And that's balanced by its imperfection and how dangerous it is and so on. But with the Skaven Doom, part of the realm of chaos has found a real tangible foothold in the mortal realms. An entire section of Blight City, this vast underwarren empire of the Skaven that normally existed as a pocket in the realm of chaos, has now splintered into the real world. The Great Horned Rat's domain was pulled into reality by this explosion. Now, what's interesting is, the other Chaos Gods can say, go corrupt realm gates. That's been a thing since AOS launched. The whole series began with a realm gate in Akshi that was converted by the forces of Khorne with blood magic to be a gateway straight to hell of Khorne's realm. Super metal, I love it. And it is at least the goal of 3 of those Chaos Gods to completely envelop the realm, to bring all of Akshi into the realm of Khorne, for example. Or to his kingdom, rather. But that's inherently different than what the Great Horned Rat did, which was he created his own door. And it's a far more stable and permanent solution to a realm gate, because in those same stories where Khorne corrupts a realm gate, they're also brought down. You can destroy it. This is 4th edition. Realm gates, you know, I'm sure they have a health stat somewhere. But corrupting things that already exists to ripping your own major segments of the realm away. Yes, he detonated realm gates to do so, but there were other places they did their own rituals. Like, it wasn't all using everybody else's stuff. They did a whole bunch of magic and destruction to get that spell to go off. So what I'm saying is, because of that, the forces of the Skaven through the Great Horned Rat have such a more stable way to get their forces from point A to point B, from Realm of Chaos to the Mortal Realms, than a lot of what the other forces have. And that's cool. Now we're going to go into more about the Skaven, how they organize themselves and stuff like that in future videos. But I feel like the Skaven are now very much more in line with other Chaos books in that you understand the deity at the top, and that really does help you articulate the motivations and the mindset of the faction below them. Seeing the Skaven as the embodiment of desperation, and all of them at that intensity level and self-centeredness is just perfect, and I could not think of a better way to explain it. Now, how they, you know, as a society function is a totally another deal, and there's great reasons why the Skaven manifest their reverence for the Great Horned Rat differently, but the core emotion is so understandable. And as we kind of transition, normally I end my videos with this segment of like, why is this cool? Just kind of taking a step back. For us as players, okay, if you play a Horde army especially, understanding the mind at the top makes the dudes at the bottom more fun, right? Clan Rat 5 million just kind of blends in with the rest. So it's easy to mistake them as faceless and lacking in character, but to have a real draw of raw emotions attached to them, it goes a long way. And so seeing like, what does the Great Horned Rat want? It's a reflection of all the people below him trying to appease him, copycat him, get his attention. And so that's where you can start to build the interest that comes from your particular army. Now, this seeing him ascend to another level, I would absolutely adore it if one day we got a whole slate of Great Horned Rat demons. We do have some. The Vermin Lords that we're going to talk about. There's also the new named character, Vizek Scour. I'm going to do a dedicated video on the demons of the Great Horned Rat, because there's not that many of them. There's not really a ton of lore behind them. I was more meaning like a whole range of them, kind of like how the Chaos Gods have their own demon archetype arm. Because if there's one thing the Skaven need, it's more units. I've always said that. Anyway, friends, I found this to be a really cool depiction. It's interesting when, like, there was some discussion in a Warhammer community post about the Great Horned Rat ascending to deityship, and I kind of, like, lurk in a lot of online Age of Sigmar lore forums and that kind of stuff, and there was just a lot of discussion about people really, like, no, they would never change the 4. It's like, I mean, everything's on the table, and they did it in such a, I feel like a cohesive way with the rest of the Age of Sigmar lore. It made sense, it was impactful, and it made the Great Horned Rat interesting. And that's all I want. Just make him interesting. For such a cool army, for such an iconic faction and style of artwork and all this stuff that the Skaven has always had going for it, for Games Workshop, I just felt like in the Age of Sigmar era especially, they weren't given that polish to make them truly fascinating. And I feel like this Battle Tome did deliver on that, not only because of the things we mentioned here, like clearly defining the Great Horned Rat's role within the army, or within the overall setting, I mean, is one thing that's really great. But putting, you know, his personal plans, machinations and stuff like that on the table just made it a really fun read. Most of these battle tomes, I feel like I'm rereading a lot of the same stuff, particularly when it comes to, like, frankly, the Daughters of Cain books. There's so many of them, and a lot of the lore specifically feels just kind of copy-pasty. This is one that from the get-go, learning about the Great Horned Rat's personal change, and then how that's going to disseminate down through the army about their own sense of superiority and arrogance, and now that they're the big guys on the global stage, it was just, I couldn't put it down. I loved it. So anyway, friends, thank you so much for hanging out and listening. As I yammer on about the Great Horned Rat, I am happy to be back after a little bit of a hiatus. Had a great summer, and now that Battle Tomes are coming, I'm so stoked to jump into more Age of Sigmar lore. Subscribe if you don't want to miss any more Skaven or AOS content, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Thank you so much, and happy wargaming. Welcome, esteemed rodents, to the illustrious councils of the mortal realms, because today we are continuing our discussion about the Skaven, following up our video on the Great Horned Rat. Today we are going to be moving into the Council of 13, which I believe is where the Skaven lore is at its richest. Because yes, we explored the deity of the Skaven, but the way that the belief and devotion of that deity can manifest is a wide spectrum. As we talked about, they are a faction based upon the idea of desperation, so how do you get them to work alongside one another? From hurling plague bombs to Frankenstein-like body horror, mass troops, and robo-gun rats, they've tried it all. And so in this video, we're going to talk about how the Skaven divide themselves, meaning how they pursue their various interests and ways of worshipping the Great Horned Rat, but also how they unify to get anything done. This is a perfect chaos faction to embody that idea of like self-destructive progress. They can do anything when they unify. It's just so difficult to get them all on the same page that most of the time their plots fall apart before anything happens. So we're going to talk all about that today. One thing really quickly before we jump in, if you are interested in this faction or anything Age of Sigmar, please consider using any of the affiliate links in my link tree down below. Using those, you'll see exactly how much money you'll save, and every time you do, at no cost to you, it puts a tip in my tip jar that directly supports me, my wife, our cats, the whole channel, and I could not be more grateful for each of you. Special shout out to Games Workshop for starting up an affiliate program for their merch store. I absolutely adore my Gloomspite Gets journal, and I'm waiting on my Nurgling to come in the mail. So if you're interested in any fun stuff, posters, journals, any of that kind of thing for Christmas coming up, please consider using the affiliate link down below. Also, as 4th edition is upon us, if you are looking to learn more about Age of Sigmar, the game, or anything about their models, please consider checking out Goonhammer, just another network that I'm friends with here. They have awesome content, blog articles regarding tactics, getting into the game, building and painting reviews, that kind of stuff. So if you're looking to learn more about the game itself, check out Goonhammer. I also learned recently that one of my favorite podcast hosts, Campbell, is starting up their Goonhammer TV content here on YouTube, so please go support him, give them a like and a subscribe. It would mean the world to me personally. I'll leave a link down below for you. Now, before we go too far, I want to condense all the lore about how the Skaven organize into a single line from their battle tome, okay? This is incredible. It just says, quote, "Skavendom is a tyranny moderated by assassination." And I'm not gonna lie to you, I read that and I was like, well, anything I say in this video is just superfluous to that. There's nothing that will top the succinctness of that as a piece of text. And honestly, it makes a good deal of sense when we think about the kinds of things that the children of the Great Horned Rat that we learned about previously would be like, right? We learned all about him. What would his followers be like? They probably would be deeply dangerous. But even within that kind of dangerous, manic assassination, moderation kind of a setup, there's still a power structure and there are still traditions. And they largely come down to the idea that might makes right. Now, for those of you who don't know much about the Skaven, when we talk about the Skaven having to live together, it's almost always in relation to Blight City, which is kind of like the half in the Chaos realm, 1 foot into the mortal realms, thanks to the Skaven Doom home of the Skaven. Outside of there, like your individual holds that are all around the realms, whoever's in charge of that particular hold, they reign supreme. You don't need to work with anybody if you don't want to. But it's when they're all put in the same location that these politics begin to mean a lot more. Now, I explained Skaven structure to a friend of mine like this. Imagine a city with a ton of very small gangs. Okay, maybe groups just defending their particular block or something like that. And as they conflict with one another, some will be subsumed by another. You'll see some groups rise, others will fall, And sometimes groups might temporarily work together and so on. It's a little ecosystem of informal groups of people. Now, instead of a location, like your block, defining who's in a gang, what if the gang was defined by their hobbies and interests, or how they worship a religious figure? And that's essentially what we talk about with the Skaven. Instead of gangs, they call them clans. And these clans are generally shaped by the interests and eccentricities of the warlord at the top. If what really makes the neurons fire for a Skaven is this thrum of machinery, they may end up leading a clan that uses warplock engineers and the doom wheel and the lightning cannons and stuff like that. Is that Skaven at the top, what lights their engine a religious fervor? Well, then it's going to take the form of a church, and that's how we get things like the clan's pestilence, which used natural, not natural, but biological warfare to do the will of the Great Horned Rat. Now, over time, certain Skaven clans have become synonymous with a particular interest of, or warfare of some kind. In the examples we just gave, right, Clan Scryer are basically rogue MIT dropouts making all kinds of incredibly dangerous and unstable technology, whereas Clan's Pestilence take up the mantle of religious prophets and zealots to carry the good word of the Great Horned Rat. But also understand that you'll get enough of these nut jobs together, with each Skaven warlord thinking that they're the hero of the story, and due to mutual interest, they have to start building these power blocks and interests around their particular worldviews. And so they have allies, they have conglomerates that. And the reason I point this out is because there's no way that you are limited to the existing clans. For example, we call it Clans Scryer because it's all of the clans that act in a way that Clan Scryer has become ubiquitous with. So you don't have to be Clan Scryer if you have all the tech stuff. You can call yourself whatever you want, and you can still be a member of the collective Clans Scryer. So let me give you an example. I'm just going to do this off the top of my head. Let's make a fictional clan. I'm going to call mine Clan Cricket. I'm not sure if that exists, but it sounds like a Skaven-y combo of syllables. Clan Cricket is led by warlock engineer Vermin Crick. He rose to power through making all kinds of cool tech, selling the blueprints to Clan Scryer in exchange for funding and workers. So he's an independent contractor, if you will. At one point, he wiped out a rival under the protection of a clan's molder. And so he gave their Beastmasters a simple offer. You can work for me, or you can die. Okay, so now we have my fictional Clan Cricket with a blue color scheme, its own unique army favoring Clan Scryer keyworded units with some molder splashed in, and this is loosely a small subset of Clan Scryer in my lore. That's the kind of freedom you have because of the way that they constantly dominate and subsume one another and employ their services to each other for money and profit. You have the power and the freedom to tell whatever kind of story, to build whatever clan you want. And I love that. It's such a trap to think that all of your army has to be locked into a single keyword. And it's that power structure that I think has always been interesting, because that's what leads to the moderation by assassination, right? In that fictional story I just made up of Clan Cricket, if one of those Beastmasters hires an assassin from Eshin to kill the warlock at the top, and then he takes power, those are very Skaven-y stories. That's how this works, and I love it. Now, I'm going to do a dedicated video for each of the great clans, as they're called, that all have their own specific keywords. But for a brief introduction here, as we're talking about the whole organization of the city, the major clans that form the power blocks of Blight City are Clans Verminous, usually your rank and file warriors. The ethos here is quantity is a quality all its own. Clans Scryer, we talked about them, arcane engineers that use warpstone of all kinds and chaos technology. There's the Clans Molder, which is a different kind of mad scientist. They use biological creations as the weapons. So like the Hell Pit Abomination, the Brood Terror, all that. The Clan's Pestilence are religious zealots that want to use disease to scour the realms of life. Sometimes they'll work alongside Nurgle armies, but they do have different end goals that we'll discuss in a dedicated video. There's the Clan's Eshins, which is basically a series of master assassins that can sneak just about anywhere. And the last one is called the Master Clan. Now, this isn't organized in any way that the others are. This is just kind of a class of Skaven that is set apart as wizards. This is the Greyseers. Like an albino Skaven will be born sometimes with horns. They are considered to be touched by the Great Horned Rat, and typically those are your wizards, prophets, and so on. All of these power blocks are vying for seats on the Council of 13, which is the grand governing body of Blight City. The more seats you have, the more power and influence you have. You achieve seats by advancing Skavendom in just about any way. So if you have a particularly massive success, you can be like, I deserve another cheer. You have to make the case for it. You have to prove that you did the work and that you're a success within Skavendom, but you can get them. Now here's the catch. While there are 13 seats on the council, one is always left vacant. And in previous battle tomes, it was always like that's kind of an honorary 13th seat for the Great Horned Rat, and it still is. However, it's specifically in this book, they went out of their way to say it's made out of warpstone, and it's specifically there so that Screech Vermin King, the greatest exalted demon of the Great Horned Rat, if he decides to, he can come and sit down in that chair and weigh in on a decision. So he doesn't always, but if there's a big thing that the Great Horned Rat wants to have happened, there is always a spot for his particular emissary available. So this is the top of our power structure branch in Blight City, and it's from here that the power and authority is disseminated amongst the faction and therefore across the realms. So, let's say for example, that the Council of 13, after much arguing, decides to attack Hammerhall Akshi. I'm making this up, by the way, to illustrate how command works. Well, the Council of 13 decides it. Hopefully, Screech Vermin King will pop down, give his thumbs up, something like that. The council leaders from each clan will then relay those orders down below. So the Scryer leaders will send out words to all Clan Scryer affiliates. We need war machines, we need ammunition, and so on. Start moving it all towards Hammerhall. Those clans can then relay that order to lesser clans below them, but also they can begin hiring one another to make this happen. If you get the order, hey, Clan Scryer, we're going to attack, this specific side of the city, and you're looking at it and you're like, man, I could really use with a lot more bodies to take that particular place. Well, that Clan Scryer person, this is a great time to go to the Clan's Verminus and get a bunch of clan rats. And then you start taking all of that, again, towards Hammerhall. If Scryer wants guns, well, they need rat ogres to bolt the guns to make storm fiends. Let's get to bartering. You guys got Hell Pit Abominations? Awesome. Can we use them to pull the Warp Lightning cannons or whatever? But remember, the further down the chain you go, each of those warlords, and all of their subsidiary warlords, all think that they are the main character of their story. And all of them are trying to hire Ashen assassins to kill the person above them and usurp the power. But clearing away a rival above you doesn't mean anything if you can't get the job done. And so with this power structure, everyone is deeply incentivized to make their plans happen as successfully as possible, just get the job done by any means necessary, but also to kill the person above them to prove that, hey, listen, this guy who was above me, I don't know how he got a knife in his back, but I got the job done, so clearly I'm the next person in line for the job. That's basically it. You proving constantly that you are the best thing for Skavendom as a whole, while Skavendom as a whole is trying to kill you for the position that you're in. And it's in this way that the whole army, collectively, moves in a direction. But they do so with backstabbing and manipulation and conquest in their minds. And I wanted to end this section of the video with just a wonderful tagline. If you've ever seen a Games Workshop battle tome, sometimes like the chapters will have headings and then there's like a little maybe 1 or 2 sentences in bold text below that, and then it goes into the rest of the article. There's some bold text here that I wanted to read, and it just says, "The perfidious ratmen. To witness the Skaven at war is to glimpse the apocalypse. Twisted fusions of man and rat, they epitomize the most despicable traits of mortal kind. Callous, cunning, and foul beyond imagining, they strive to reduce the realms to ruin, overthrowing the natural order with wicked glee." That's the direction that all of these little maniacs who think that they're the main hero of every story are moving towards. And it's like, awesome. It's just the scale is unimaginable and it makes them so interesting. And I want to end this video like I end all of them by talking about why is this cool? Why are the Skaven so cool as a society, even, one step removed from their deity, the Great Horned Rat? I love this because the storytelling opportunities are endless. The mix of keywords, but an emphasis in how they work together, and comparing that they're all just different reflections of the Great Horned Rat is just so fun. Now, I haven't really looked at them too much in the new edition, but I compare this faction to, say, like the Gloomspite kits, where you have the different sub-faction keywords kind of locked in there, but how they interplay with one another and how you build armies and stuff like that is just, it feels much more natural and fluid here, whereas it used to feel like the Gloomspite Gits book was Gits, and then also we had nowhere else to put Drogs, so we put them in this book sometimes. All of these things feel like they're in their own natural environment, and the way that they usurp one another and build power blocks and support one another, it works really well. The idea of all these little weirdos all stuck in the mindset of pure selfish desperation, all trying to scratch whatever makes their brain itch, is just, it makes for great reading. They are both a truly terrifying enemy to think about, but I mean, honestly, what's fun about the Skaven is they do make for some extremely fun comic relief, because half the fun is just Skaven tripping over themselves, right? It's the guy with the warp lock cannon going, double the power, and then he just blows himself up into oblivion, and the guy next to him is like, haha, my arrival just took himself out. Now I can shine, double the power, and I'll kill the bad guys. And he blows himself up. It's just hilarity like that. Darkly comedic and a lot of fun. Right, in the example we made up before about everyone attacking Hammerhall, maybe half the leaders in that example end up being dead by assassination, so the power base is always in flux and undermining itself. So yeah, even if they strike out with a big punch and do attack Hammerhall, they can't capitalize on it because they're fundamentally weak at the core. The leadership that just achieved the thing, a lot of them are dead because of assassins. And the guy taking their job doesn't know all the details yet, and so it falls apart. And that's how you get these big swings. And then the army just kind of crumples afterwards. It makes them fun, interesting, and truly it does make their threat seem apocalyptic in the moment. And then if you can just endure that initial punch, it typically does fall apart. Anyway, friends, I would love to hear your thoughts about the Skaven structure, their power blocks, the various clans. Do you have a custom clan? I think mine was Ricket that I said earlier, to illustrate how different groups can work together. If you have a custom one, I would love to know about it in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, listening, and again, if you're thinking at all about getting anything for Games Workshop stuff, please consider using one of the links in my link tree down below. And until next time, welcome, Claw Lords and Backstabbers, to the endless swarms of the mortal realms, because today we are talking again about the clans of Skaven, but this time we're going to start diving into the different subsects, the great clans, and the units that fill their ranks. Now, as we explored in our last video in the series, these sub-factions are not rigid. They hire, enslave, and battle amongst one another, and work together, if possible, as a last resort. That said, they do all have their own eccentricities and specialities that make them dangerous both individually, but also devastating when unified. And so today we are going to start the investigation of the Skaven clans and the units that exemplify them, starting with the one that is going to show up in most of the stories. In fact, most of the encounters that anyone ever has with any Skaven is going to involve the clan's Verminus, a power block whose might is solidified by the endless numbers of Skaven lives they can corral into battle. If quantity is a quality all its own, these Claw Lords are not found wanting. So we'll learn about them, the clan rats, the storm vermin beneath them. Now, for those of you who have never heard of the great clans before, we discussed them briefly in my last video in this series. I kind of gave a brief description, and I said Verminus, quantity is a quality all its own. That's all there is to it. That's the abbreviated version. And it's true that it is just a collection of Skaven clans that all cement their power with numbers. But what's interesting is that this makes them foundational to the Skaven war effort, and why I say that they are the most seen. Because any Skaven army by its nature has access to teeming hordes of bodies thanks to these guys. Whether it's Clan Scryer, buying Skaven crews to move their big technological pieces, or to be, subjected to in experiments, this is likely the pool that a lot of Skaven will pull their raw numbers from. It is the asset and the value that they can bring to all clans without question. And honestly, being a warlord who focuses on numbers production and the selling of your kin breeds a special kind of leader, wouldn't you think? In this case, they're called Claw Lords, but you need a special kind of personality, right? These are very calculating Skaven who are always doing mental math. How many bodies do I need to throw at X to have Y result? What is that action worth to the other clans? And, second question, how fast can my breeders replenish those numbers so that I can not be left undefended or to make my next sale? And of course, understand, no number of Skaven is too much. They aren't concerned with minimizing casualties. It's always a matter of displaying power, but never letting yourself, get so weak by, hiring out your forces or selling off slaves, that kind of stuff, that you can't defend your own empire. So these Claw Lords are playing this constant game of making it seem like they are strong, but also having the excess to sell to get other things that they need to keep their strength. And you'll often see their signature crimson red colors somewhere in a Skaven army. And these Claw Lords, one of the things that make them unique amongst their kind is how willing they are to be hired and sell, forces to other clans. In fact, it's probably the closest thing to cooperation that the Skaven as a species have. Because these Claw Lords, right, they have understood that mental math of like, I could spend 2,000 clan rats to topple that wall. Or I could sell 500 of them to the clan Scryer, who will loan me a warp lightning cannon to get through that wall way faster. And in that kind of bartering service, and essentially that's bartering with worthless lives, is how Skavendom works. And if you think about a Skaven leader trying to build a little army, Skaven lives essentially become the currency, which in a weird way makes the clan's Verminus the banker for a lot of armies. You can't pull your war machines into battle if there's no one to pull them. And so in a broad sense, that is the clan's Verminus, but let's highlight the units that they bring to the battlefield. They don't individually have a lot of lore. I mean, there's so many units in this battle tome, it just doesn't have the time to give, a full dossier on each of them. So we'll crank through them fairly fast, but remember, again, these are the Skaven you're most likely to see just because of how big a proportion of Skavendom they make up. So as far as heroes go, we've been talking about them before. We have the quintessential Claw Lord. And really all you need to know is that might makes right. The most successful Skaven learn very quickly that you are either predator or prey, and they do everything that they can to eagerly move from prey category to the predator category. So what does that mean? They bully, they muscle, they coerce their way to the top of their litter, and then their claw pack, and then so on and so on. You need to be a character to rise to the top of being a Claw Lord. You need to be a character who can do a lot of boasting, deliver on those boasts, and then also maintain that threat from your internal enemies, all your peers who want to kill you. Claw Lords are universally arrogant, demanding, and brash, because those are the skills that got them to where they are. And for that reason, Claw Lords have always been a super fun character to kind of write your own backstory and stuff like that with. Although, this new battle tome gives us one standout Claw Lord, a named character finally, called Critic Foulblade. Now, I'm going to do a dedicated video, but his story is very simple. Again, there's just not a lot of room in these books to give dedicated stories for everybody. So he's just like a Claw Lord we described earlier, but with one notable difference. He does that same mental math, but a little bit differently. He is willing to tactically retreat or make decisions that preserve the life of his Skaven warriors. which is weird. People look at him like kind of cross-eyed because they're like, these guys are meant to die. Why are you protecting them in any way, shape, or form? So everyone thinks Critic is super batty for caring about the lives of his Skaven underneath him, but what they don't get, because they can't kind of pop out of it for a second, is that Foulblade does two things when he cares about his Skaven's lives. It creates a paper-thin veil of loyalty, because if you're a Skaven slave, someone who doesn't throw your life away needlessly must absolutely seem like Gandhi. Like, relative to all the people who don't care about you, someone who's like, if you don't have to die, well, why don't you not? Is absolutely saintly. But his logic is that every Skaven spared today can be thrown into the meat grinder later. His big secret is not that he cares, it's that he's not wasteful. He just wants to have more resources long term. And so those are the two purposes. Again, that thin veil of loyalty goes a long way when you have power blocks as large as they do. And then being able to masterfully use that War Machine system more efficiently than his competitors is an edge. At one point, a demon noticed that Critic is obviously on the rise to some level of power, and so this demon, a Vermin Lord, reaches out to Critic and says, hey, will you help me betray the new named character that they just released called Vizix Scour, another Great Horned Rat Demon. Critic did the mental math and is like, man, this Vermin Lord can't take on Vizix Scour. There's no way he's going to win. So let's do a double cross and I'll work this to my advantage. And essentially what happened was this Vermin Lord got double crossed by Critic and his soul was imbued into a Warpstone blade, which is the foul blade that Critic has access to. That Warpstone blade has a demon inside of it, and it's awesome. Now, as a character, where his personal internal strife comes from, and I love that they made this because it makes him interesting, is his body is aging, and so he's kind of losing his warrior edge. In a might makes right society, that's very bad. And more, he has to use the demon blade, like tap into the demonic powers, to save himself in combat. And every time he does so, he has to forfeit more time on the demon's sentence. So in a twist, the most frugal Skaven is struggling to be frugal with the time left on his artifact of power. Which I think makes him, that's a very compelling internal strife. I've always liked that. The first time I read it, and I went back a few times and reread it, I was like, man, that sits really well, because I love that kind of like desperation. There's even a sidebar where he's arguing with the demon in the blade, and the demon's like, 8 months off my time. He's like, 5 seconds, and they kind of like haggle to a few minutes or something like that. But then the demon delivers, imbues him with strength and might, and Critic can defend himself, get out of trouble, and re-cement his power. Now, as far as the units go, there's really just two. There's Storm Vermin. These are the elite heavy infantry of basic Skaven. And when I say they're elite infantry, I mean like elite in the sense that they're not they're unmutated, they're not souped up by science or anything. These are as strong as actual organic Skaven can be. Essentially, in the breeding pits of the Skaven, sometimes a litter will be born where one of the young goes nuts and murders all their siblings, right? It goes into that total predator or prey and they decide to just be the murder fest. These babies are then set aside and marked as potential storm vermin. They are then put into a grueling life of training, torture, mind control type stuff, and then war. That when that cycle of training is completed, makes a storm vermin that you and I get to play with on the table. They are heavily armored, deeply trained, and fiercely loyal, and they are inducted into a Storm Vermin Claw Pack, a unit that they stay in until they die. Now, any Claw Lord is going to covet all of their Storm Vermin units because these are really the mailed fist within their army. But more successful or larger clans can actually sell or loan these units out. And so this is why you can see like a Plague Priest or a scryer engineer surrounded by a personal bodyguard of storm vermin in a story or something like that. That's where it comes from. But as a side note, this works to the Claw Lord's advantage. Because imagine if you wanted to knock off a potential rival, what better way than to have them surrounded by mutinous bodyguards? Like, what happens if the Claw Lord says, that guy I sold you to, get rid of him. They kill the Plague Priest and then just come back to their clan's verminous. So it's a risk. And also an investment. And below them, and really the ones you'll see the most, are the clan rats. And again, there's not a ton of lore here, but let me summarize with this. Never feel bad for killing clan rats. Their lives are a bit crap. They're born in breeding pits by the thousands, they're used by currency in the Skaven army system, and because so much of the Skaven might is related to the mass of the army, they are important. So even a scryer, a clan that focuses on guns and stuff like that, it's still going to have thousands of clan rats to go pin down whatever they want to shoot, or to just stand there and act as a meat shield. They cobble together whatever scraps of clothing or armor they can rip off the dead. Weapons are largely picked up off the battlefield, and their primary drive is just to survive, to eat, and to make it to tomorrow. And it's within these desperate grounds that some rise to become Claw Lords, while most of them die a pretty sad death. Now, when I end this video, like I end all of mine, by simply asking the question, why is this cool, right? Why are the clans verminous, the nameless hordes of endless numbers, why are they interesting? And for me, it has to do with being on the receiving end of a Skaven assault, right? Like, so let's imagine you're a guard on a wall, okay? You're going to hear this army before you see it. You're going to hear the scrambling and the chittering of 1,000 rats and rat men. And it's only, like, say, at night when the lightning strikes and you have that brief moment where the battlefield is illuminated, that you see an endless sea of bodies at your doorstep. The unstoppable doom nature of the Skaven is, to me, wrapped up in their ability to create armies of such numbers that you're like, how do you ever beat this? How do you ever root them out of the realms? How could you possibly out-attrition them? Even if you have warriors that come back to life, Sigmar, you can't out-attrition this. Now, of course, lucky for everybody else, they are possibly a faction defined most of all by internal strife. Not just Skavendom, but also like clans verminous in particular, because they're not, there's nothing, patented, right? Scryer technology, as long as you don't share the plans on how to make something in particular, you're valuable and nobody wants to kill you for that. You have a value and a use, but anyone can be a Claw Lord provided you put the knife in the guy who came before you. So it's just interesting. There's a lot of rotating leadership within the clan's verminous, but it does breed a very particular kind of leader, as we talked about. And while other clans have maybe flashier ways to get things done, big cannons, big monsters, or whatever, truly it is the endless swarms of clan verminous that are going to see the overall war won against the forces of order. And that, friends, is my thoughts on the clan's verminous. I would love to hear your thoughts. Are you building a thematic focused verminous army? My immediate thought is like, it'd be kind of difficult to have an all verminous army, but I love the way in this story that they added in that they are so like happy to engage with other clans and hire them out and stuff like that. So I could absolutely see a predominantly verminous army with maybe a few, we'll say, outsourced positions, like a warlock engineer and some cannons or something like that. But the lore of these guys works so well to having a fun and diverse army that I feel like you can easily have your own custom clan that you write that is dominant in one, meaning in this case clan verminous, and then a smattering of others, and they still feel very cohesive. I enjoy that a lot. Critic Foulblade is a really cool character we'll explore later on, but just a fantastic way of interpreting what makes him different from another Claw Lord. He just does mental math a little different. Like, oh, I love that. So anyway, let me know your thoughts down below. Like I said, if you're looking for any used models or fun kits that might be out of print or hard to find, go check out Noble Knight Games and support another small business. Thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming, friends. Welcome, contagion bearers and plague spreaders, to the diseased heart of the mortal realms as we continue our dive into the virulent world of the Skaven clans. Today, we're going to be focusing on one of the most feared and detested amongst them, the clan's Pestilence. And while we've previously explored the very conventional side of Skaven, dumb warfare, meaning like the endless hordes of Verminous, clan's Pestilence is a festering wound that refuses to heal, spreading corruption and decay wherever they tread. Unlike some clans whose power lies in their sheer numbers or their technological prowess, Pestilence thrives on the unholy might of disease, rot, and religious fervor. The Plague Priests, who are the leader echelon of these Skaven, are not content with simple conquest. They seek nothing less than the total infection, desecration, and desolation of the mortal realms. They view diseases, especially virulent ones, as divine gifts from the great horned rat. They see him as the desolator, the ruin of all the realms. And so today we are going to continue our exploration of the Skaven clans by diving into the filth and squalor of clan's Pestilence, from the lowliest plague monk to the highest plague priest. We're going to uncover the units that were thrown into this new book, how you can build an army around them, and really just explore their unique blend of religious zealotry and biological warfare that makes them a force unlike any other in Age of Sigmar. Now, one of the things that I love about Skaven when it comes to understanding the depictions of them in lore, to me, you can read a third-person perspective about how the rats operate, but really the feeling of fighting Skaven comes from the perspective of whoever they're attacking. And I used this example before in previous videos. Just imagine that you are a guard on a wall, and this enemy is coming at you. What does that guard feel, or see, or hear? In the case of the clan's Pestilence, you're probably going to smell them before you see them. There's an acrid stench of decay filling the air. You'll hear them hacking and coughing, screaming, because half of them have rabies and they're just absolutely mad. You'll hear church choir style music, because again, it's a religious procession. And as they come into the view, it's not the sight of rusted weapons or ragged clothing that strikes fear into your heart. It's basically that every breath you take is infected in some way. Every time you breathe, you're inhaling the death that they worship. The clan's Pestilence are not content with victory on the battlefield. They seek to leave a legacy of corruption that's going to linger long after swords are put down. Right? They want to cleanse and scour the realms. Their internal strife may keep them from achieving ultimate dominance, but they do manage to unite their forces. The result is a religious persecution wave of the Skaven and a desecrating of anything that stands in their way. Now, as we mentioned in the Verminous video, how their particular clans operate and how they are reared raises a specific type of warlord. The same is true for clan's Pestilence. Whereas the Clawlords have this kind of faux military sense, right? Might makes right. The theme or facade of the clan's Pestilence is that of a church. The Great Horned Rat is not an abstract deity to them. He's a character whose motives and desires can be understood by following his teachings and tenets. And so in this microcosm of Skavendom, they elevate great orators, crusaders, zealots, and so on. They're still playing the same, backstabbing game as the other clans. These are not turn the other cheek kind of religious folks. This is like, I cleave thee in the name of king and country kind of religious folks. But even just that sets them apart in Skavendom. Because while they do participate in the greater Skaven politics that we discussed earlier this week, they don't really like other Skaven, and other Skaven don't really like them. Other Skaven see the clan's Pestilence as generally uncooperative, even by Skaven standards, and too self-focused on their, let's call them missionary trips. Not to mention that anytime there's a civil war amongst the Skaven, the poisonous fumes that clan's Pestilence uses in their attacks usually kill way more than you'd expect. They kind of hit above their weight class because of the poisonous nature of their weapons. Because in a warren full of rats, the one with the largest can of exterminator spray is king. But likewise, the clan's Pestilence have their own political game amongst the religious leaders of their church. Like, they have their own organization, so much so that they're not really bothered by the others. They obviously contribute to the greater political scene, but they really do have their own, again, microcosm within Skavendom. And just like with Verminus, where Skaven need to bully a group into achieving something, and that's kind of the start of a warband, the same is true here. Some Skaven will claim a divine vision, rally a congregation into a zealous act of martial achievement, and then begin escalating through the ranks of the church. Like I said, same format, different vibe, different skin. And on the topic of what this Skaven church wants, to put it simply, these clans began when some Skaven long ago injected himself with some form of disease. It's kind of been lost to time. But this disease made them more strong, it made them more intense. I think rabid would be an apt word here. And overall, it made them much more dangerous in combat, so this Skaven did well. Towards the end of their lives, as the illness progressed, they began to proclaim direct visions from the Great Horned Rat. Essentially, they're losing their mind to the disease. These visions include a world that is scoured by plague, where only the Skaven and the rats below them scurry over the bones of their enemies. That is the foundational moment of Clan's Pestilence, right? The mission of the church is to use biological weapons to scour the realms clean and make it an ideal home for the Great Horned Rat. Now, as far as a purpose goes, or on the day-to-day level, since that initial infected Skaven myth, the religion has proliferated. It has religious texts and teachings added, and even had deified teachings from contagion-addled Skaven claiming visions. These books are called the Liber Pestilent, a set of ancient religious tomes amongst the Clan's Pestilence, which were lost throughout the ages, and each one of them is a part a recipe guide, part Bible, part fever dream. Within these tomes, or these religious texts, are also guides for creating what are called Great Plagues. These are crews of contagion that are so dangerous in lethality that they are nearly mythical. It is thought by the church leaders that once all the Great Plagues are brewed and unleashed in a single event, the great day of scouring will come, where the Great Horned Rat will wipe the realms clean. So far, the greater Clan's Pestilence all combined have found 9 out of the 13 Great Plagues. And it's also important to note, each one of these things is super hard to make, so even if you find the book, that doesn't mean they can actively make all 9 on demand. Some of the ingredients are exceptionally rare or hard to come across, or you have to improvise a replacement. It's a lot of work. So that's kind of how they are at a high level. Let's start investigating the Clan's Pestilence more by going through the various units that they have access to. Starting off with the Plague Priest. Now, at the heart of the Clan's Pestilence are these Plague Priests, the leaders we mentioned, the twisted clergy of the Horned Rat. They are far less concerned with martial prowess and more focused on spreading disease and corruption in the name of their god, and they lead their followers in prayers and rituals. They unleash plagues as much as they can, and are constantly using their oratory skills to whip up a fervor amongst their followers. Whereas other Skaven leaders might be motivated by personal power or survival, a Plague Priest, when it gets into a real religious experience, is consumed by faith. A faith that will sacrifice anything to achieve its end. So even if you die getting one of the Great Plagues going, that's worth it. And to complement this, this great orator and wielder of Skaven, sometimes they need a ride. The Pope has the Pope-mobile, but the Plague Priest, he flexes by riding a plague furnace into battle. Essentially, it's a vortex of all their most lethal concoctions. Think of it as a giant cauldron that you can swing as a weapon. It's peak War Machine with a dude on top going, drive forward so I can hit them with my sword. And really, that's the only leader there is. I'm going to do a dedicated video for the Vermin Lords. They do have a Vermin Lord, the Corruptor. But as far as actual Skaven leaders, that's all there is. However, there are several units below them, the most widespread of which are the Plague Monks. Rank and file of the Clan's Pestilence are the Plague Monks, teeming masses of crazy fanatics who spread disease and decay wherever they can. They form the backbone of Clan's Pestilence armies. They're driven by all kinds of disease. All their weapons are rusted and crude. and they tend to be highly infectious. Remember, they're injecting themselves with diseases, so even if you fight them, if you take even a tiny scratch, you're going to have a bad time afterwards. Next up is the Plague Pack. This is kind of a newer unit that we've gotten in the last year or two, I believe. Essentially, these are swinging massive smoke-belching sensors filled with all kinds of toxins. This is essentially like the elite guard of the Plague Priests. Skaven so infected with disease that they kind of go into a full delirium. Sometimes the priest can nudge their visions to basically make the priest god himself, meaning that this crazy Skaven would do anything to protect their leader because now you're built into their fantasy. So if you're the Plague Priest, you get a bunch of these guys, you basically inject them with diseases so they don't have rational thinking, you present yourself as a deity, and now you have this sort of delusional loyalty, which is loyalty nonetheless, so that a Skaven can, dare I say, trust his subordinates. Doesn't always work out for them, but that's essentially the idea. You make them so frothing at the mouth that they can't make their own plans and machinations. Finally, we have the Plague Claw Catapult, a war machine that lobs disease-ridden corpses and filth into the ranks of the enemy. It is a testament to the ingenuity and depravity of Clan's Pestilence, and essentially, this is their siege weapon. They don't need a weapon that can go through the walls if they can poison everybody inside them without having to raise an arm. Now, one thing that was added in this last battle tome, I love. It's a fun story about the Plague Claw origins. It says the catapult was first designed as an answer to Clan's Scryer's ranged combat domination. It's basically all the Plague Priests being like, we can hit stuff far away too, you're not special. And there's a specific story that the Plague Priests love to bring up to Scryer warlocks, known as the Battle of Blood Spew. In short, there was an elven fortress that a Scryer army just could not break into. They would fire off the warp lightning cannon, Storm Fiends were there, all their new models, all rolling sixes. Nothing was breaking the wards of this particular fortification. Then the Clan's Pestilence rolled up on the nearby hill with just an absolute wall of catapults, and they lobbed plagues over the fort and essentially corroded the wards away, so that by the time they collapsed, the Skaven could enter, and boom, all the defenders were just pools of blood and ichor. So this is basically how the Clan's Pestilence get a rise out of the warlocks. Oh, you have guns. But you know what? Our enemies are ready for guns. You know what they're not ready for? Mutabu. Or whatever disease they feel like hurling over the wall that day. Shout out in the comments if you get that joke. And so I want to end this video like I end all of them. Why is Clan's Pestilence cool? Well, it's Skaven in a different lens, which is always fun. If you don't know, if you're newer to the game, Clan's Pestilence used to be its own full faction, but the game was getting bloated, and so they brought it back into, general Skavendom, which I like where it is now, partially because of where they fit into kind of the overall Skaven ecosystem. Now, one question I see a lot in the comments is how do they pair or contrast with Nurgle? Are they allies? Are they enemies? And the answer is yes. Chaos factions are a lot like Venn diagrams. You can always find some place where they overlap. Some situation or event where their desires or their methods are mutual. This is such an instance. Nurgle is the god of plagues, disease, and despair. The Clan's Pestilence use biological weapons like plagues. So how are they different? To me, the real difference is in the goals. Nurgle wants to divide, the Great Horn Rat wants to subtract. And what I mean by that is, when Nurgle assaults a city with plagues, it is for the purpose of creating despair in the mortals at a cycle of life they can't control. One person, when dead, is host to billions of lives in the form of microbes and bacteria. He divides one life into many. And as such, his depiction, within his realm of chaos is a vibrant garden full of all kinds of growths and organisms and so on. Of course, they're all chaosy and corrupted, but that's his perception. In contrast, the Clan's Pestilence are not looking to turn the great wheel of life, so to speak. Their post-battle scenes are not verdant gardens of plague flowers and stuff. It's dark, it's lifeless earth that is nearly uninhabitable to all flora and fauna. It's the difference between breaking something down and scouring out of existence. Plagues of such intensity that they're intended to burn themselves out with just how virulent they are, whereas Nurgle would be much happier to have a not as deadly plague that spreads everywhere. For the Skaven, it's a means to an end. If Nurgle, in a dark, humorous kind of way, is the god of life and rebirth, the Great Horned Rat is the god of scouring and ruin. So you'll see depictions and stories of like Maggotkin of Nurgle forces in fighting or doing a siege or whatever, and Clans Pestilence show up. The Venn diagram overlap is that their diseases don't really affect one another. They have some level of immunity. But as anyone with a job can tell you, just because you have a coworker and you're assigned to the same task does not mean you are on the same team. Every Claw Lord is looking for a way to stab the Maggotkin of Nurgle warlord in the back. Every time you hear a Maggotkin of Nurgle, leader chant a praise to Nurgle, the plague priests are cussing because the glory should be going to the Great Horned Rat, and so they're constantly, again, friction. Sometimes they're enemies, sometimes they can work together. They do overlap a lot, I'm not going to deny that. I just think the end goal is different. It seems like Nurgle wants to proliferate the most life possible by dividing it, and the Great Horned Rat, at least through Clans Pestilence eyes, use disease to eradicate. But I would love to know your thoughts. Please leave them down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'm excited to keep continuing our coverage of Skaven. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming. Welcome, wargamers and warlocks of all stripes, to the dark labs of the mortal realms, because today we are diving headfirst into the maniacal world of the Skaven, specifically the genius tinkerers of Clan Scryer. These are the brilliant and highly unstable mad scientists of the Skaven race who blend ingenuity with warpstone-fueled technology. Unlike the other clans that we have covered this week, the Scryer brings a more explosive approach to the battlefield, and while every Skaven faction is dangerous in some way, the Clan's Scryer are one of those that blend their feral rat cunning with a penchant for world-ending machines and eldritch power. They got an immense amount of love in the latest Skaven release, lots of new toys, lots of new lore to explore, and I am very excited to tackle this video. Introduce the units, the heroes, that kind of stuff that you and I get to interact with on the table and learn more about what drives the Clan's Scryer. For those of you who are fairly new to Age of Sigmar or the Great Clans, Clan's Scryer stands apart from the other Skaven clans through their mastery of both engineering and magic, particularly with the volatile power that comes from Warpstone. Scryer clans don't deal in simple brute strength or numbers, they deal in devastating machinery and destructive arcane devices. But there is a Venn diagram, meaning they can hire a bunch of clan rats if they need to, they can do whatever they need to get the war machines in there, but in general, this is the tech-focused faction. Much like the rest of Skavendom, the Clan Scryer will work alongside other clans, but their contributions to battle tend to come in the form of lethal machines, specialized weaponry, and they often see other clans not just as sometimes allies and enemies, but as disposable guinea pigs, test subjects for their new war inventions. And this makes them a vital part of that Skaven ecosystem we discussed in the Blight City video. Verminus can bring numbers, Scryer can bring something like a war machine, but the forces need each other to function. You need rats to push the war machine up and to have a meaningful breach. Once you get the wall down, someone has to be able to go in and actually fight. Likewise, an endless sea of Skaven could really benefit from having a war machine that can go through a wall. The Clan Scryer's power lies in its warlock, a combination of mad scientist, warlord, and arcane practitioner. And honestly, that's a good note to start on because these are the most technologically advanced Chaos faction at the moment. We'll see if we ever get Chaos Dwarves where they land on stuff. But, that being said, even though it's all technological, the titles and the structure of Clan Scryer is modeled after like a witch coven. In fact, the groups of leaders are even called engine covens, which is fun. It continues mixing that, mysticism and science and all this kinds of stuff. And warlocks run the show, developing everything from warp lightning cannons to doom wheels. They view the hordes of clan rats from Verminus as perfect fodder, easy to replace and expandable when one of their weapons go haywire, which does happen a lot. The Clan Scryer don't care about body count. In fact, they often see more dead Skaven as a data point for improving their machines than anything else. All right, so Scryer logic is if 1,000 Skaven die, but the experiment advances, it's a win even if the battle was lost. If you debut a new type of cannon and it does its job, but then the infantry can't finish the battle and they lose, the experiment regarding the cannon was still a resounding success. Now, like all the great clans of the Skaven, they do revere the Great Horned Rat, and this was sort of an interesting thing I was hoping to learn more about. How does a sub-faction that is kind of focused on science and technology revere a deity? Well, they view the Great Horned Rat as the Great Dark Innovator, a mind that's made of cogs and wires and warpstone sparking synapses, that spends eternity doing nothing but thinking up new ways to kill and ruin its enemies. And that is essentially the ideal that each engine coven works towards. They see the creativity that they have as a divine spark of destruction. When they design a new thing, when they are inspired to create, that is a manifestation of their God's will here in the realms. They are obsessed with whether or not they can do a thing instead of whether or not they should. So you'll see them all over the battlefield, right? Tinkering with machines, trying to increase their killing power, and further their experiments. And yes, sometimes what they're creating blows up or melts down. That's all just part of the educational experience. And like I said, it's described in terms of its structure as a witch coven, but this is actually a technocracy. You rise and fall in stature based on how quickly you can learn the technology and innovate upon it. If you bring something useful to your warlord, you rise in favor. If your inventions let them down, you're going to end up being the next test subject. Which means, like the rest of Skaven, there's a lot of opportunity for backstabbing, duplicity, espionage, right? Stealing somebody else's plans, and so on. And so let's get into the good stuff, right? What you will actually see on the battlefield. Now, there's not much lore for them individually because there's so many units in the Skaven battle tome, but I'll highlight what makes each of them fun or unique. But keep in mind, this is what actually makes it to the battlefield, and for everything that you see on the table, there are theoretically millions of Skaven on the back end designing new weapons, better warp lightning cannons, faster doom wheels, all that kind of stuff. So starting with the heroes, I'm going to put these into one grand category known as the Warlocks. They are the heart and soul of Clan Scryer. They're the masterminds who devise all of Scryer's warp technology. We called them earlier engine covens, and at the top is the Arch Warlock, the leader of the clan. They earned this position through the creation of devastating weaponry and a deep knowledge of the arcane. They deliver on what they promise. And I want you to think of this as your head of research. He'll manage all of the covens below him and maybe steal their ideas and innovate on them. They go to battle in their Skaven mech suits, basically. It's basically power armor with a built-in flamethrower. And on their back is a warpstone accelerator, which essentially makes them into a crude wizard. Instead of having the natural ability to unleash like an arcane bolt or something like that, they're able to reproduce that effect through mechanical means. Now, immediately below them is the general pool of warlocks, the most numerous of which are the engineers. These are the minds that create, test, and use the arcane devices of the Skaven. This is your general sub-hero. Within that pool of general sub-heroes, there are some specialities, however. The Warplock Galvanier is a new hero, and they're essentially engineers that are obsessed with warp lightning specifically. The type of gun that they love in the Skaven arsenal is known as the Warp Volt Scourger. We'll talk about that later. But it's essentially anti-cavalry weapons that fire lightning arcs all around and electrify the battlefield. The second subtype of engineer is the Warplock Bombardier. And they're essentially the same thing, but they are focused entirely on artillery, so think warp lightning cannons and the like. So you have engineers, those are your general researchers. You have people focused on warp lightning, other specialists focused on bombardments and artillery. And together with the Arch Warlock, this is how you have your leadership crew. This is how you dictate what your clan is studying and researching and developing and able to sell to other clans. Moving into the various units of the Clan Scryer, we have the Doom Wheel, possibly one of the most iconic units in the Skaven book, period. It is a massive warp-powered wheel of destruction. Okay, basically it's a hamster wheel that has a bunch of Skaven slaves inside of it who are running wild, and it has these 2 huge warp lightning generators on the sides that unleash arcs of deadly energy. As it gains speed, it essentially creates friction, almost like a warp lightning version of friction amongst itself, which then randomly it will just barf out to everyone around it. It makes them highly unstable, very dangerous, but the thing is though, while they are likely to, detonate and devastate themselves, seeing one of these things plow into a rank and file bunch of infantry is just meant to destroy the morale of the enemy. So the Doom Wheel is always going to be a staple. Next up are the Storm Fiends, and these are examples of what happens when the Skaven collaborate, specifically with the Master Molders of the Clans Molder, who we talked about in our last video. Basically, they put their minds together to make Storm Fiends. So the way it works is you take a Rat Ogre that we explored in that video, you cut off his hands, replace them with weapons, or I should say a weapons team worth of guns on his arms, and there you go, that's a Storm Fiend. But there's a drawback. The Rat Ogres are not bright. They can't be trained to do anything than maybe swing their arms and use these big guns like they're clubs. So they need help. Now I mentioned in that Clans Molder video, the Skaven method of adding RAM to their computer, to use little other speak, is to graft another brain on. This is where an entirely second creation of the Master Molders comes in. The Brain Rats. Tiny, shriveled monsters that are all brain power, no body. They are grafted into the backs of the Storm Fiends, and they ride on their backs to guide the weapon systems, to point out targets, to give them some sentience above base instinct. So imagine if you had an ancillary brain that gave you the same dopamine hit when you point your arm and, shoot warp fire at an enemy that the Rat Ogre would normally get if he's up close and personal clawing at them with his claws. It's just ways of manipulating the more primitive mind to get them to use the weapons that you have, which has always made them a really interesting mix of like creepy, gross body horror science and just really cool. Another new kit that we got are the Acolyte Globadiers. These are the rank in between like your base clan rat and your engineer. You're on a dedicated path to the clan scryer, but you yourself maybe haven't created anything of significance yet or had any big military gain in order to kind of thrust you up to the rank of being an engineer. So in the meantime, they experiment in making their own equipment and go to war by throwing glass containers filled with gaseous warpstone runoff. And kind of how I imagine this, right, is sort of a do the best you can and work with what you got kind of mentality. So like, I imagine the warpstone dust that they get is sort of like a byproduct of other manufacturing that the clan does. And you scrape together enough, of this stuff to weaponize it. And then you can go to your arch warlock or the next engineer in charge and be like, look, I designed this amazing use of warpstone powder as well as, security equipment to keep myself breathing as I use it. So you're trying, again, to accrue inventions and demonstrations of your prowess with what you have on hand. That's how you prove yourself to become an engineer, and hopefully from an engineer to an arch warlock. But I will say the descriptions of what this stuff, this gaseous attack does to you is savage. Like if you inhale it, you dissolve from within, like it accelerates rapid decay. And so you're clawing at your rotting throat to get air into your lungs that have already decayed while you're still alive, which sounds rough. Next up are the iconic warp lightning cannons, and these act as the heavy artillery in the Skaven arsenal. They are unstable to the core, powered by the essence of raw warpstone, and the cannon blasts are somewhat unpredictable, but when they hit, they annihilate stuff. Crews are always trying to kind of juice up their engines, their cannons as much as they can to get as much damage as possible, which also sometimes sees them explode. Another new kit that we got that I actually really like are the Warp Spark weapon batteries. This is the multi-kit we got where you can have 3 teams of 2 and you can have them like carry a weapon team of some kind. And think of these as acolytes that did something right and are having a good day, right? They're just weapon crews, but it signifies more and more access to the raw technology. Really quickly, I'm going to go through the different weapon options just to kind of give you a sense of what they are. First off, there's the Rattling Gun, a Gatling gun that spews warpstone bullets at high speed, high rates of fire, low accuracy, gotta love it. There's the Warp Fire Throwers, which deliver arcs of superheated warp flame that basically can melt anything to cinders. And I like it because it just exemplifies a different way that the Skaven are tapping into warpstone as an energy source. And lastly is the newest weapon type that was added to the Skaven arsenal, the Warp Volt Obliterator. These are initially designed as scaled-down warp lightning cannons. Like, the original designer blew up his entire section of the Warrens up in experimentation, but it broadcast the idea to all the other Scryer Arch Warlocks. And so all of them were sitting like, man, that was a big explosion. He was trying to do what? A warp lightning cannon on your wrist. That sounds rad. And they all started trying to reverse engineer, but they actually made it work. And so yeah, the idea is it is a portable warp lightning cannon. Now it's not wrist sized yet, but it is small enough for a team of 2 to be able to walk around with it. There's the Warplock Jezzails. These are long-range snipers of the Skaven army, and they essentially charge up and accelerate warpstone gases and use that almost like a Gauss rifle, if you will, and fire off a round strong enough to pierce inches of steel. It takes a team of 2 to operate, and these guns are immensely expensive to produce, and so there's this pressure if you're a Warplock Jezzail to deliver. You have to be able to cripple priority targets with accuracy. You have to justify your cost. Next up is the Rattling Warp Blaster, a war machine that was featured in the release trailer for 4th edition, and it's made possible by the creation of the Warp Spark Accelerator. Now, the only thing notable here, it's a giant cannon on wheels or whatever. The thing that's really notable here is that this was designed when the different clans of Scryer were all forced to work together to achieve the Skaven Doom. So this is an example of a new piece of tech that was come into existence simply by the fact that they were all forced to collaborate. But really the big thing here is that accelerator engine it has. I hope to see more inventions with that in the future. Next up is the Doom Flayer, built upon the scavenged dwarven technology of holds that they have once conquered. These are essentially machines that are meant to bring murder to the enemy rather than from a distance. And they are exactly what it seems like. Giant balls of whirling blades that just tear straight into the enemy in melee. And as you can imagine, the drivers of these things do not tend to live long. However, they do present themselves as quick ways to power, so low-ranking Skaven, they just go for it. I don't want to have to wait, to become an engineer and then maybe a bombardier and then maybe shoot my shot for being an Arch Warlock. I just want to ride cool machines. I just want to play around with the tech. You can do this. You won't live long, but you'll have a good time. And lastly is the Warp Grinder. Simply put, this is a mining team. The Warp Grinder is a giant warpstone-tipped drill that they can use to burrow through the cosmos. Once they arrive to the battlefield, usually with some friends, that drill becomes a powerful weapon. One that, usually by its nature, pops up behind enemy lines. Reading this just made it occur to me that I need to do a dedicated video on knotholes, but it is interesting nonetheless. And so let's end this video like I end all of them by asking the question, why is this cool? Why is Clan Scryer cool amongst the other Skaven clans? Well, first of all, they got so many incredibly cool new kits that it's just kind of hard to argue with how cool they are. I think the anecdote that best fits this has to do with the video game. I remember the first time I saw the Doom Wheel animated in the Total War Warhammer series, and it was incredibly cool because there's just something about the terror of these things that look like they shouldn't work but they do, that when you see it tearing through a group of people, it sounds absolutely horrific. And that's part of what makes Scryer fun, is just imagining how terrifying these things would be if you were on the ground looking at them. As many folks felt when they saw the AOS 4.0, launch cinematic, seeing the Skaventide set in motion is deeply fascinating. We get to see several Clan Scryer units in action in that video, and it seems absolutely apocalyptic. And that's what makes the Clan Scryer so fun, is that everything that they do seems absolutely unstoppable, even though it's all held together with, thumbtacks, toothpicks, and glue. You feel like the apocalypse is upon you. And while there's always a chance that your inventions will blow up in your face, there's also the chance for glory and prize and profit. But friends, those are just my thoughts on the Clan Scryer. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. How do you imagine your engine coven looking? Do you have a name for your Arch Warlock? And if so, what kind of inventions do they favor themselves? For me personally, if I had to pick my top ones, I'm going to have to go with the Doom Wheel as well as the new weapons teams. I absolutely adore those models. But friends, that'll do it for me today. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out with me, and I will catch you in my next video. Happy wargaming. Welcome, seers and assassins, to the blighted corners of the mortal realms, because today we are continuing our exploration of the Skaven faction with their debut battle tome in 4th edition, and we're going to fill out our roster of the remaining 2 great clans that are playable. This isn't to say that there aren't more clans of your own devising and stuff like that in the lore, but rather these are just the big power blocks that exist within Skavendom. Those clans being the clans Eshin and the Master Clan. 2 forces that represent overall an incredibly small percentage of the overall Skavendom, but have the most oversized influences in actively directing its course. And it's that duality of being the smallest mouse who ever roared, but being the loudest mouse who's ever roared is what makes them both exceptionally interesting in their own ways. They frequently work in tandem, the clans of Eshin and Master Clan, and it's their job to basically intuit and then implement the will of the Great Horned Rat by spell or by blade. And so today we're going to explore the clans Eshin and the Master Clan, the units that we get for each of them, which I'll state up top, there's not very many War Scrolls here, but more to the point, having a discussion about how they fit into the overall hierarchy and power structure within Skaven, because honestly, the most intriguing things about them tend to be off-table. They have some of the coolest, most effective units in the game, like Graciers and Assassins and all these kinds of stuff, but realistically, when you talk about like the overall influence in guiding Skaven activities, much of their power is stuff that you'll never see on the battlefield. Okay, so for those of you who are new to AOS or Skavendom, we're going to tackle these 2 clans individually, and I thought it would make the most sense to put them into one video because there's not really enough meat on the bone for them individually, but they work in tandem so well and so much that it makes sense. And also I want you to keep in mind that all the things we've talked about Skavendom before in terms of, their duplicity, their desperation, their maniacalness, the fact that all of them think that they're the main character in this epic story, all of that is true for these Skaven too. And so we'll kick this off with the clans Eshin. These collectively form the Assassin's Claw of the Skaven faction. They are essentially part of the Skaven ecosystem that goes back to the phrase that we mentioned in video 2 of this series, that Skavendom operates as a tyranny moderated by assassination. The clans Eshin make up a good majority of those who do the assassinating. Because sure, a lowly clan rat will kill their pack leader themselves, just to get that seat and that power. You don't need to hire an assassin for something that low level. But when we're talking about the scale and the magnitude of influence, the power, the resources, and paranoia that, say, an Arch Warlock of the Clan Scryer has, he's going to have some formidable defenses. He's going to have brainwashed Skaven, maybe an armored entourage of storm vermin that they bought from the clan's Verminus as we explored. Like, my point being, no one's just going to walk up and kill this guy like a clan rat could to his pack leader. So when it comes to these assassinations of bigger movers and shakers within the Empire, you do what any enterprising Skaven does. You hire someone who's already good at that thing. And this is where the clans Eshin come in. Skaven who want to become master assassins within the Eshin clans and satellite ones begin their training in Ulgu. When this tradition began has been lost to time, but basically it's in Ulgu that Skaven learn to cling to shadows and move silently. They also gain skills in how to misdirect, remain undetectable, important skills that earn the clan money, like how you map out enemies, how you track things. But it's from there that the structure of Eshin becomes very nebulous. There's a sense that each assassin is purely out for their own benefit. You know, they'll do anything for money, prestige, etc. But at some point, that does funnel back into the clan, because they do have a well-cemented power base. They have a seat on the big Council of 13. They have recruits, trainers, ambassadors, ways that authority and job opportunities are disseminated throughout the clan. And so we don't get a whole lot of insight into what that structure is, but I think that it would lend itself really well to a novel. A book came out a while ago for the Gloomspite Gits called Bad Loon Rising. It's like it follows the story of a Grot and his Troggoth companion basically on their rise to power. It's a really funny and entertaining story. It gives you great insight into how the Gloomspite Gits are. I think that Clans Eshin would immensely benefit from something like this, where it's not necessarily indicative of, you know, how all the clans operate, but some insight into how orders are given, where people are sent, what the training looks like, what the different skill sets are. Like, all of those things exist in Bad Loon Rising, and this is certainly one that I believe, like, would benefit from a book like that. Show me a rise to power, even if it's not, you know, prescriptive of the entire faction. The way one clan does something would be very helpful to us understanding. Because at the end of the day, this is going to be one of the most foundational clans that has ever existed, and are woefully underrepresented on the table. Because the truth of the matter is, as long as 2 Skaven exist, one is going to want the other one dead, and as long as 3 Skaven exist, one's going to happily kill another for money. And so some manifestation of either the skills or the goals of Clans Eshin have always been throughout Skavendom. And at some point I'm sure they'll shine a spotlight on it more and we'll get more information. But hey, do you know who the #1 customer of the Clans Eshin are? Well, it happens to be our next subject, the Master Clan. In fact, it's often thought, the book points out, that Eshin sort of acts as the militant arm of the Master Clan, but that is not true. They're very distinct orders and structures. They just have a fantastic working relationship. In business speak, this is the value of good B2B partnerships. Well, the Master Clan exists outside of the traditional rabble of power blocks that fight for control in Blight City. In fact, they don't have a permanent seat on the Council of 13. But they exist at this tier of leadership because they're clearly touched by the Great Horned Rat, because these are his prophets, his seers, and mystics. The Master Clan is, of course, the Grey Seers of the Great Horned Rat. And in a society where might makes right, having access to latent magic, which makes them distinct amongst all Skaven, and a way to justify that you are the one who knows what the Great Horned Rat wants, that's an unfair advantage. Right? He's got a built-in social proof. I'm different, so when I say I know what the Great Horned Rat wants, I know. How can you argue with that? And then if someone challenges that, I can demonstrate that power in real time. And these Skaven use that unfair advantage to rise in power and stature, acting as army leaders, counselors, courtiers, whatever they can to kind of weasel their way into the power structure. Then, when they're kind of situated nicely, they'll seize power and direct the course of events, either by tricking their opponents, subverting them, hiring assassins to kill the right people at the right time. Basically, they are the ultimate wild card, but ones that have been clearly blessed by the deity of the Skaven. And it's difficult to express how disproportionate their influence is. Like, Grey Seers are an extreme anomaly amongst Skaven. They're very rare. And then some of them just die because being a Skaven is dangerous. So if you make it to the point where you're an active Grey Seer, like, you have to know how to play the game from very early and be very cunning. That said, there is no Skaven warlord who would not like to have a Grey Seer with them, and that's how they kind of get their hooks into this power structure. All Skaven would love to have a natural wizard with them, so that even if the contraptions by Scryer crap out on you, you still have some magical power. All Skaven want to think that they are doing the will of the Great Horned Rat, although how that manifests might look different from clan to clan. So having someone who says, I know the will of the Great Horned Rat, and you're doing good, Clawlord, solidifies that in their mind. Grey Seers can make competent and capable generals, at least They have the force of character to get things done amongst Skavendom, which means that they kind of separate themselves as leaders from the common rabble. And of course, we only have a couple units that either include Grey Seers or, that have that keyword. Most of the greatest stories we have from AOS feature Grey Seers in some capacity, whether being advisors or leaders themselves. And at this point, I want to transition more into talking about the units that you and I can bring to the table. I've tried to give you a picture of what these things might look like off the table and kind of highlight their exaggerated influence for the sake of the fact that they don't have a lot of units to put on the table. But we will cover what lore there is and tackle them one at a time, just as before, starting with the clan's Eshin. And for this, we only get 2 units that give us insight into the mysterious structure of the clan. The lower tier is that of the Night Runners. Strong Reagan-era models that have just stood the test of time, I guess. But more seriously, the Night Runners are Skaven that are formed into kill packs, and these are the ground troops of the clan's Eshin. They move as a single mass. They're trained, again, to cling to the shadows or the edges of the battlefield. They're able to throw knives of all different kinds, they've crude weapons, and basically their job is to look for weak points in the enemy lines. But it's important to remember that they are not chaff. Just like all the other great clans tend to have like their own elite version of infantry, so one step up from clan rats for Pestilence is the Plague Monks. It's kind of their unique personal infantry. Well, this is theirs for the clan's Eshin, but they're actually trained to like do things. They have skills and training that they got from Olgu, services that they've been hiring out. These are actually the workers who do a lot of that scouting and what I assume is the general income generation of the clan. In fact, you rarely see whole armies of kill packs because a lot of the work that Night Runners do happens off the table. Espionage, the low-level kills, recon scouting. But on the table, they operate as a knife of the Skaven aiming at the enemy liver. Now above them is the only hero option we get for the clan session, and that is the Deathmaster. Their lore says that they're oftentimes trained by the clan's Night Lord themselves, which, from the context I take, meaning the actual leader of clan's Eshin, like how the Arch Warlock is the leader of clan Scryer. In Eshin, it's called a Night Lord, which I'd love a model for. Anyway, Deathmasters are trained assassins that exemplify the clan as a whole. When you see assassins in game, this is who we're talking about. They're able to slip in unseen, blend in with the masses of Skaven or the shadows within the walls or terrain, and then they lash out with incredible martial skill, looking to wipe out a target. And they all have this kind of like mythos around themselves. So, for example, some might create a rumor that I'm able to climb, smooth walls, meaning there's absolutely nothing to grip onto. Others might be like, I can slip through a keyhole, whatever it might be. And so this is how they're able to build their own rapport and reputation and be able to charge more for their services. And unfortunately, that's all the insight we get. So like I said, I would love a book on them. I think we have enough to make that book interesting, but plenty of room to explore new ideas. And then we'll transition over to the Master Clan. And there's really just one unit to talk about here, and that is the Grey Seer. Albino white fur, curved horns, and natural access to magic, with a penchant for murder, make these Skaven stand out. They often offer their services to clans as advisors, or just wizards that'll accompany their warband into battle. And the Grey Seers have been directing the course of Skavendom for eons. And the reason is, the Great Horn Rat, supposedly, speaks to them of opportunities, of battles, of riches, and spoils. And so the Grey Seer listens and then relays these messages into action via the clans that they align themselves to. Few Skaven leaders, from Claw Lords to Arch Warlocks, will turn down the aid of a Grey Seer because they're just so dang useful. Now, one thing to mention is the mount that the Grey Seers can often be seen with, and that is the Screaming Bell. And this book gave me some insight. I don't remember this being in the last battle tome, but I loved it. I thought it was interesting. Essentially, the Screaming Bell is an original design by the clan Resnick, right? This clan has Screaming Bell, TM. And they have a specific process for designing and molding these bells. And it basically laces them with arcane power, Then they sell the bell to Greyseers, who defile them and corrupt them for 13 days, before mounting them onto these scaffold carts. And essentially what a screaming bell does is it projects the power and the authority of the Greyseer riding it. It turns the endless masses of Skaven around them into a channeled and focused force that hurls towards the enemy. At the same time, as the magics are invigorating and directing the Skaven, they're absolutely demoralizing the enemy because the sheer power and, chaotic influence of the rings of this bell just kind of like shatter people's morale around them. It makes it for an interesting mount. I had not read before that it has like a specific clan that makes them all. Now, we do have a named Greyseer in the form of Thanquol, who rides atop his personal horror known as Bone Ripper. Now, folks, I'm going to be honest with you. I held off on doing a Thanquol and Bone Ripper lore video for the longest time because I thought this book, going into 4th, was going to have more information regarding him, but it didn't. I know that Thanquol is a very cool character from the old world and the personal favorite of many lore nerds. He has a long history, specifically with the Duarden Gotrek, who also exists and has been brought forward into AOS. But they haven't really done much with that relationship. That said, Thanquol is probably the most blessed of the non-demon Skaven. He has these warpstone-tipped horns, a near unstoppable killing machine that works underneath him, and he's able to unleash magic like no other Skaven, like huge vortexes of warp storms and stuff like that. But there's not a ton of information about what he's actively doing in this battle tome beyond that. One fun fact that I did think was interesting was that he has a ton of ties to the clan's Molder specifically. Because Bone Ripper gets so beaten up and chunks of him will be blown off during battle, Thanquol needs the surgeon warlords of Molder to basically remake him, repair him, fix him up. And this has gone on for so long to the point where no one's really sure if any pieces of the original Bone Ripper still exist, but they kind of just keep slabbing new things onto him. And I absolutely love it. And so as clans rise and fall in favor, some Molder groups will come and work under the banner of Thanquol specifically, and that's actually why we get his own army of renown in the Skaven book. If you haven't seen that, it's like its own army structure and everything. It's called Thanquol's Mutant Menagerie, I believe. And it's him bringing these forces directly to bear. Now, I do want to do that fuller video about Thanquol and Bone Ripper, but I need to learn more about him before I get roasted rightfully in the comments. I was really, like I said, hoping this book would fill us in more on his antics in AOS specifically, but we didn't really get those. I compare it to other heroes, like Gotrek got a very big release back into AOS. So did, Sigvald the Magnificent. And I just feel like Thanquol didn't, but he's so iconic and he's in such a crazy cool faction, I just don't get it. So apologies, it'll take a little longer since now I have just decided I just need to go back and read a bunch of old books. But regardless, I want to end this video like I end all of my videos by talking about why is this cool. Well, as we talked about a few times, having the smallest of factions within their army have the largest amount of control and guiding them is really fun. Every one of their models, barring maybe the Night Runners, really represents an immense amount of resources and power and political standing within the Skaven universe. Every one of them matters. They also make fantastic characters for you to write your own stories. So if you're somebody who writes the lore for your army, having a Greyseer character is fun because they can be whatever you need them to be. They exist anywhere they want in the power structure. Now, one question I'd like to ask the audience, though, and please leave your ideas in the comments down below, do assassin-type things tend to work in AOS? I know for the longest time, some units would hide inside others, and you would have to basically have them pop out at a certain time. I'm curious if you find that works. Are you getting a lot of use out of your Death Masters? Please tell me in the comments because I would love to hear it. It's such a cool idea, and one of those things that when you see it and play against it in Vermintide, it immediately clicks as to how dangerous these things are, but I've always wondered if that translated to the tabletop version. Anyway, thank you all so much for hanging out with me and listening to this video. I'll catch you in my next Skaven lore video. Until then, happy wargaming. Welcome, Claw Lords and Demon Princes, to the unseen shadows of the mortal realms, because today we are continuing our discussion on the Skaven faction by jumping into the Vermin Lords. And I wanted to talk about the Vermin Lords distinct from the various factions because, as we will see, while each demon of the Great Horned Rat may have attributes that align themselves smoothly with the goals of some of the major clans, they do act as a separate animal. And that allows them to lead on multiple clans of all different kinds of goals and direct the Skaven like pawns on a grander scale. And so some of the highlights of this video is just going to be asking questions like, what does it mean to be a demon of the Great Horned Rat? How do they manifest themselves? What are the goals that they all have, and how do they go about achieving them? We even have 2 named demons, one of them that was added in this particular battle tome that I want to shine a spotlight on, and so we're going to do all of that in today's video. Okay, so for those of you who are new to Age of Sigmar, or I'm going to say GW lore in general, they have their own kind of like demon mythology that they all work on. We're going to explain this. So while the Vermin Lords may just look like taller versions of their Skaven brothers, the divide between them is just vast. Vermin Lords do manifest as giant Skaven with these elaborate twisted horns. Each one of them could be mistaken for being like an avatar of the Great Horned Rat himself. But it's important to remember that these are not mortals, like the rest of the Skaven are. These are demons. And in GW lore style, demons are exceptionally interesting. Essentially, you start with a chaos god, and in order to allow that god to disseminate their will across the mortal realms, they break off smaller portions of their power. They then craft it and give it a crude level of sentience of varying levels. Basically, the rule being you only need to think as much as it takes to get the job done, generally, and then they are released with their god's blessing. These demons can then, if they have the sentience to do so, go on to recruit, manipulate, or bless mortals, make promises, elevate people, and so on. So they become free agents, but they are a direct reflection of some aspect of their god. They're a piece of him. Now, the Great Horned Rat in this respect stands apart from the other Chaos Gods in the sense that he has no lesser demons. Those being smaller demons with little or no independent thought. So like Plague Bearers for Nurgle, Khorne has Bloodletters. He doesn't have any of those kind of foot soldiers with like little to no intelligence. Instead, each piece of him that is broken off to create a Vermin Lord was molded to be a highly capable and independent force. There are a few stories that include these guys, and they often first just appear to a Claw Lord or a Grey Seer as a dark voice giving them orders, but then maybe reveal themselves later as needed. They are often leading multiple clans at once, pointing them towards a single goal or direction, or manipulating whoever they need to, or winnowing out whatever clans stand in their way. It almost feels kind of Zinchi, to be honest with you, the way that the cults operate individually and then maybe they can be guided by a singular great demon, has a lot of that same kind of flair to it. And it's important to remember that there's no hard lines here, right? Keywords, at least in the lore sense, don't really matter. So a Vermin Lord may appear in person like a black shadow form, but work most with clans Pestilence and Scryer, even though Shadow and Stealth is more tied to Eshin. And so that's why I wanted to talk about them separately, and that's kind of one of the main reasons I really like Vermin Lords, is that they're technically allowed to synergize with things for a gameplay concession, but lore-wise they operate outside those normal structures. They are independent operatives that are given full authority and resources by the Great Horned Rat to sow madness and destruction into the world. And honestly, these demons are just so much more creative than the normal Skaven around them. But it's important to remember that they keep all the flawed personality traits that define the species. Because remember, the Skaven are a reflection of the Great Horned Rat, and these are pieces of him. They suffer from all the same foibles and weaknesses and backstabbing and politics that all the other Skaven do. The Vermin Lords just do it amongst themselves. But they do it because that's who the Skaven are, and that's who the Great Horned Rat is. The Vermin Lords are just those traits magnified in a different way, and I love that. And to that end, let's start talking about them. In terms of Vermin Lords, and the greater discussion of Great Horned Rat demons, we have a few units. Like I said, 2 named characters, one that was just added. And then there's the Vermin Lord multi-kit that can be built into a few different options, each reflecting different aspects of the Great Horned Rat. And so we'll tackle the characters first. We'll start with my personal favorite, Screech Vermin King. Now, legend has it, at one point, the Council of 13, meaning the Skavens in charge of everybody, grew so haughty that they sought to somehow usurp the Great Horned Rat himself. Amused by this, the Great Horned Rat scooped up the entire council and basically put them into like a soul prison where they colluded and backstabbed against one another for centuries until eventually they kind of like dissipated and their soul stuff kind of interweaved as they were just left there. From this collection of souls, the sentience that is Screech Vermin King was given life. In what is by far the most gruesome way to achieve cooperation imaginable, because Screech is able to wield the various clans and their politicking as if he were still the members of that original Council of 13. In fact, we mentioned it before, the 13th seat on the council is specifically reserved for him to descend and give the Great Horned Rat's opinion. He sits there, adjudicates if he wants, gives orders, has people work towards a goal. For example, it was Vermin King who introduced and ultimately orchestrated the events of the Skaven Doom. He directed the clan Scryer on the arcane machines that would rip Blight City into the realms. He directed others to poison ley lines, destroy hindrances like you read about in the book. Skaventide, I think is what it's called for this new season. It's all about one of the walls that was a hindrance to the Skaven invasion. It was a big plan, decades in the making, but that's the level he works at, with no time constraints because, again, he's not immortal. We also saw him in the last book of the campaign series that introduced 4th edition. Gunnar Brand was in like the heart of a mountain. Screech Vermin King is there at ground zero for that massive explosion that brought Blight City in. Now the other named character that we get is a new one, and I was so curious to see how he fit into the power structure with Screech Vermin King. But here is the 2+ tough synopsis of the story of Vizek Scour, Prophet of the Horned Rat. Back in the events of the last narrative arc for AOS, a new god was unleashed, named Kragnos. The way that the realm shook when he broke out of his prison, and the accompanying Rite of Life by Alariel, shook up the setting in a big way. It was even felt within the realms of chaos. Specifically in Blight City, a large flame of primordial energy roared up, almost like someone knocked a pipe loose and the demonic energy of the Great Horned Rat was just kind of shooting out wildly. Some Skaven tried to tame it or harness it. They were immediately blown up. Others prayed to it and their throats were slashed, and no one really knew what to do with this thing. It was kind of just sealed off as a section. And it remained that way for some time. Sort of like I kind of see it as like a primordial shard of the Great Horned Rat. He hasn't given it form yet, but it's there. Well, when the events of the Skaven Doom went down, and the Great Horned Rat ascended, he felt a sensation that he liked. Worship. Now, he'd always had worshippers in the form of Clans Pestilens, but I guess in this sense it was a little different. That was a minor sect of Skaven, worshipping the Great Horned Rat as a scourer and plague wielder. This one was all the clans in one chorus, proclaiming the Great Horned Rat as the deity on the level of his enemies like Khorne and Tzeentch. And to revel in this new level of religious piety and significance, the Great Horned Rat looked at that moat of primordial power and poured his desire for reverence into it. He sculpted it into the sentience we now know as Vizek Scour. Essentially, it's a vermin lord who specifically is meant to act as a religious force within Skavendom. Vermin King leads on the back end, making decisions, disseminating plans. Vizek leads at the front, getting even like the lowliest clan rat whipped up into an excited fervor that sees Skaven armies swing above their weight class. He's the zealot. But it's important to remember that he is just one more Vermin Lord, which means he has competition. We briefly touched on it in the clan's Verminus video, but at one point there was another Vermin Lord who wanted to strike down Vizek, down a peg and basically shut him down. He tried to hire Critic Foulblade to help him. Critic did the mental math, saw that Vizek is a way more powerful Vermin Lord, and backstabbed his patron. That's how he has a Demon Blade. Point being, Skaven, small and big, see him as a massively powerful enemy and ally within their own faction. But like Vermin King, he has a unique position that operates outside the normal structure, and that allows him to work with any clans, right? Screech's big thing is that he has authority over all of them, whereas I feel like Vizik's thing is he's about Skaven period, and that is a way of circumventing all the clan structures. And so now I want to move into talking about the non-named variant. These are essentially different ways the Great Horned Rat reveals himself. And if you get a model for one, I invite you to name them and write a really cool story for them, because honestly, these tend to be the masterminds of so many Skaven plots and schemes. A lot of times, Claw Lords, Arch Warlocks, whatever, they'll go out in service, often, of a Vermin Lord who promises them power and riches. First up is the Vermin Lord Warbringer, and this is essentially like the Skaven general's dream or personification of the Great Horned Rat. These are demons that lead from the front. They're whipping Skaven factions near them or hordes near them into a frenzy, and they're clad in really, really thick metal armor as well as muscle. They look like a giant, storm vermin, just magnified. But what's interesting about them is they are not just brutes. Although they do like being on the battlefield, and they do like punching the enemy in the face, the Warbringer also embodies like the devious tactician mind of like feints and parries and counterattacks that the Skaven really excel at. They're really great at calculating how much to exploit a situation for maximum gain. So they represent a lot of plotting and planning in a military sense off the table, but then when the battle starts, they want to be up in the front. Because of all of that, they're most likely to be seen on the battlefield than compared to all the other Vermin Lords. They like being seen, and they often oversee the actions of the clan's Verminous, who also respect martial might and power. Next up is the Vermin Lord Warpseer, and this is the unrivaled masters of magic amongst the Great Horned Rat's children. They have an intrinsic connection to arcane powers, and they're able to see the threads of fate in a way that nobody else can. What this means, practically speaking, is these are oftentimes the puppet masters, right? Raising the standing of a Claw Lord only to discard them once the Warpseer's vision is achieved and they're no longer useful. Upon formation, each one of them is given a scry orb that essentially channels their magic into visions of the future. This gives them an unfair advantage in a lot of combats, and if something should change that fate, however, whatever that might be, and the Warpseer needs to escape, they can hurl that scry orb like a grenade, which is pretty cool. Next is the Vermin Lord Corruptor. These are the plague-ridden demons that are often seen in the eyes of clans Pestilence as an embodiment of their god. They wield dual plague scythes, and the Corruptor is essentially just a whirlwind of disease and murder on the battlefield. And really what makes him unique is that he's able to spread contagion by his very presence. Like as he's cutting things down, he's infecting everybody on the battlefield. The longer the battle goes on, the more people he's getting sick. And this is just a further embodiment of the disease-carrying nature of rats. Again, it's very obvious that they will work a lot with Clans Pestilence, but I do think that they have enough power and like charisma, I guess you could say, to get any clans to work with them, because they look like an icon of the Great Horned Rat. And the last one here is the Vermin Lord Deceiver. And these really embody Skaven trickery. They're demons that are assassins, basically a lot like Clans Eshin, and they are masters of illusion, ambush, and everything sneaky. Now, oftentimes, a Vermin Lord Deceiver will stay off the battlefield because they often see fighting as unsubtle. They are still Skaven though, so it's hard to resist coming in for that killing blow and stealing all the credit, so that's oftentimes why you see them. But that said, they will often lead other clans, into battles and stuff like that, or kind of coordinate Skaven to attack at the same time for the distinct purpose of distracting the enemy so that the Deceiver himself can go in through a breach and make whatever kill needs to happen. And so I want to end this video like I end all of them by simply asking the question, why is this cool? Well, the Vermin Lords represent like an escalation or a magnification of what the Skaven are. Each one is a unique brand of terror, and I love the fact that they're written in such a way to be able to pull disparate forces together into a single direction. So if you buy a Vermin Lord model, that is your license to do whatever you want thematically with your Skaven, basically. Because if they have their own opinion of how to get something done, the army beneath them, or clans beneath them, will reflect that. I find myself being very torn between wanting lesser demons and loving that the Great Horned Rat is unique in not having any. I don't know, maybe if there was something like Flesh Hounds where it's kind of a beast representation, like if there were like, I don't know, crazy pack rats or something like that, demon rats. I don't think I would want any Skaven-sized demons, like I want to use Skaven instead. I'm torn. Let me know, what do you think? Now, my favorite of the non-named Vermin Lords definitely is the Warbringer. I love the plated armor. I love the idea that he wants to be seen up there punching people in the face. Like, I don't know why, I'm just intrinsically drawn to heroes that want to fight. It's just pure hammer, right? Those heroes who are like, I'm not here to help the rest of the army. I got your force multipliers right here, and then it kisses each one of its fists. Like, that's what I like. I would love to know what your favorite of the Vermin Lords was. As far as the characters go, like I said, Screech Vermin King is still my man, but I did like the way that they brought Vizek Scour into stuff. They not only introduced a new character with a kind of a anecdote regarding how he was formed, but also then bringing him further in by having him have a story that's tied with Critic Foulblade, another new character. It just makes them feel like they fit in the book more. Like they're active characters, they have a story, they're interwoven. I appreciate that quite a bit. I think it's one of the better jobs at introducing, a big character. Because if you don't know, Vizek Scour, he's a Vermin Lord. He's the same size. I thought his model was going to be closer to like the Brood Horror or whatever it's called. But no, he's big. So anyway, I thought it was a fantastic introduction to that character and some nice spice to his backstory. Let me know your thoughts on the Vermin Lords in the comments down below, and I will see you in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming. Welcome, schemers and masterminds, to the machinations and plots of the mortal realms, because today we are continuing our conversation on the Skaven with the character known as Critic Foulblade, as promised in an earlier Skaven video. This was specifically requested by Daniel after I promised the video, and then thought that I was going to be talking about Stormcast by now, and then there's just kind of been a weird lull. So, let's keep refocusing on Skaven. Since it was the first and only so far, Battle Tome to drop in 4th edition, and one of the big additions to that army was a new named character, specifically a Claw Lord of the Clans Verminus. And honestly, this comes with a stunning new miniature. I will throw it up here on the screen for you. It just exudes so much character. And what I really love about the model is it really emphasizes his story. This, from the self-aggrandizing posture that really defines Claw Lords in general to the weapon he wields. You know everything about this guy just from looking at this miniature, right? He's dangerous and he thinks he's in charge. And so today we're going to chat all about Critic Foulblade. What sets him apart from the competition? What is his sordid history with other Skaven characters, as we've alluded to before? And what is that devastatingly fashionable sword he's always carrying around? Now, to kickstart our exploration of Critic Foulblade, I'm going to put it as super simply as possible, okay? Critic Foulblade is a Claw Lord who wields a demon blade that he earned through double crossing. But even in that sentence, right, that one synopsis, there's a lot to unpack. For starters, his position. That'll give us some insight, right, as a Claw Lord of the Clans Verminus. This is a quantity makes quality kind of leader, right? He marshals his forces, and he does so with fear, punishment, bullying. He has to defend his rank constantly by avoiding assassins, putting down rivals, raising slaves, selling them off to other clans that want to use, clan rats for their various schemes. He's of the Clans Verminus, so he does stuff like Storm Vermin. And that's how he adds something to Skaven society. He's the boss. And to stay that way and achieve more at the same time, he has to lead an army, but also have to lead a clan that produces something for other people. Right? Clans Verminus means bodies. So there's this weird balance that every Claw Lord has, where they have to keep raising larger and larger armies to assert their own dominance and why they should be in charge, but at the same time, not sell off so many of the clan rats that they can raise that they lose some of that power. You always have to be a threat to your peers while also selling them stuff. Now, we've talked a lot in this series about how the Skaven do not care about one another, right? There is only the self, and they're only the most desperate, mad version of it. So, in an environment where the default Claw Lord is expected to be brutal and mean and callous, who throws away, tons and thousands of lives to commit atrocities in the blink of an eye without caring, how do you stand out? Right? That's pretty bad. What makes you stand out? Well, for Critic, he stood out by playing the same game as every other Claw Lord, but doing so differently. And to understand the difference, I need to just once again emphasize how little Skaven care about other Skaven. Like how little a Claw Lord cares about the clan rats below him. Again, throwing them away by the thousands. So if you're a clan rat at the bottom of the hierarchy structure, and suddenly your new master does not feed you to the wolves needlessly, well, that stands out. That's a step up. Not only does he do that, he does this crazy thing, guys, where he will actually pull his troops back when they're about to die needlessly. It's not just about throwing them forward without caring. He'll actually, do tactical retreats and try to, preserve life in some way. What is that? Skaven don't do that. And from the bottom of Skavendom, Critic looks like Gandhi for seemingly caring about their lives, even in the smallest iota. Which means that Critic has done the near impossible and gotten Skaven to be something dangerously close to loyal. I mean, Skaven can do that in a myriad of ways through hypnotizing, mind control, rabies delirium over in the clan's pestilence. There's a lot of ways that they can subjugate another Skaven's mind into not betraying them, but that's not the same thing as inspiration. Honest to goodness leadership, and clan rats revere him for it. They fight harder, they complain less, because they don't feel like they're being spent worthlessly. But, taking a step back, you and I know that this is Skavendom. Critic did not get to be a Claw Lord because he's Gandhi. And the game here, to put it really simply, is frugality. When you're kind of a miser about penny pinching and that kind of stuff, not wanting to spend more than you need to, it's that thing. Every life that is not wasted today is one that I can spend tomorrow. Are legions of clan rats going to get torn into a blender by those Reclusians and they offer nothing? Pull them back. Would it be better to pull back, this sect of clan rats and storm vermin and maybe let another clan kind of fill in that breach so that my forces aren't getting died needlessly? Yeah, do that. If I'm going to lose a battle anyway, because, losses always happen, if you're going to lose, well, maybe I just won't ditch these clan rats, but I'll actually sound a retreat to try and recover some of those forces, meaning that it takes less time to rebuild. And what this does, at least early on, is gives him more resources to make big moves. Those big moves we've talking about, taking out a rival Claw Lord, or moving up into a deal with a higher ranking clan, basically building your own preeminence, as well as the size of your army. He's got loyal followers, and his warband rose impressively fast because of this, simply because he was accruing clan rats and breeders and storm vermin and all that kind of stuff at the same rate as everyone around him, but expending less. And of course, this means, they said earlier, a clan rat not lost today is one I can spend tomorrow. That's obviously true, but it also means that in between battles, that kind of balancing act we talked about of raising your own army but then raising excess to sell but not selling too much that you lose your own strength, he doesn't have that same conundrum. He can keep enough in reserve to never show weakness. He can sell large, overflows of his population that he accrues to make money that is just straight profit. And all of these things together launched his career as a Claw Lord. Now, we have no idea how old Critic is. We know he's been building this, this reputation for a very long time, and at one point, he caught the attention of a Vermin Lord with a dark offer. You see, we've talked about it before, but back in Skaven Blight, there was this weird protean energy that kind of festered in the depths, and after the Hour of Ruin, it took the form of Vizek Scour, Prophet of the Great Horned Rat. This is the new Vermin Lord kit that we got that's kind of a solo hero, representing the more religious, non-pestilence aspects of Skavendom. Well, this Vermin Lord, seeing Vizek Scour get born, is not impressed. Not a big fan. And so this Vermin Lord comes to Critic and says, hey, I want to knit together an alliance with you. We're both going to attack Vizek Scour. I'll go after the Vermin Lord itself. Critic, you handle all of his believers, right? His zealous throng of religious devotees. And together, we can take out this new person and re-solidify both of our mutual power bases in Skavendom. That's the plan anyway. And Critic agrees, but maybe with his little fingers crossed. Because at that point, our boy Critic is doing some real mental math. I'm thinking like cut to the meme where there's just equations kind of laying over his head. He's considering the size of his army, the size of the forces he was tasked with taking on, meaning the religious zealots, and then the power of their patrons. For him, it would be the Vermin Lord. For his opposition, it would be Vizek Scour. And this is important because for every other Skaven who is in the presence of a Vermin Lord, they talk about them like they are this like dark embodiment of the Great Horned Rat itself. Like these are beings beyond comprehension. They're just so massive in scale and power and magnitude. But Critic is so well enough in his, I guess path, that he can kind of pop out of it for a second and get past the being dazzled and like actually evaluate this Vermin Lord to the other one. So he's not glassy-eyed like all the other Skaven are. And he's boiled it down to, this is just a stupid squabble between the two of them. And I'm going to get drug into this. So, getting past being awestruck, who's the more powerful of the two? So, of course, going back to our story, Critic agreed with this Vermin Lord. Yeah, this Vizek Scour guy, he's got to go. And then he immediately goes over to Vizek Scour and tells him the plot. Because Critic did the math. No, Vizek's on the rise. This is a big deal. This is a major mover and shaker within Skavendom now. He's got obvious power, obvious connection to the Great Horned Rat. I know the other Vermin Lord does too, but this is something unique and different. So I just imagine that conversation with Vizek Scour walking up and be like, listen man, I got hired to kill you. This other Lord, Vermin Lord guy is going around, he's starting stuff. That's not good news or good business for anyone. What are we going to do? And while there's no details on what they actually did, I deeply hope that there's a Black Library novel on it. This actually seems like the kind of thing that would be perfect for a novel because it is character focused, and while there are, crazy big demon aspects in the Vermin Lords, they don't have to occupy an immense amount of like book time, screen time, however you want to say it. It really could just be a good story about Critic evaluating and seeing Skavendom from his eyes. Regardless, the short of it is that when this Vermin Lord goes to kill Vizek Scour, the betrayal is sprung, and the Vermin Lord is defeated and stabbed in the back. In thanks for his service and his eye for power, I guess you could say, Vizek Scour took the soul stuff of his would-be assassin Vermin Lord and forged it into a sword. This is the titular Foul Blade, and it has become synonymous with Critic himself and his rule. Now, his story could just have easily ended there, right? A Claw Lord with an outrageous ego and a demon weapon is enough to make, to sell models in fantasy battles for years. But the reason I brought up Critic's age, earlier in this video, was because it is now beginning to play a factor. His story didn't end there. We have no idea when he got the Foul Blade, but it's been a bit now. At least in terms of Skaven lifetimes. Because Critic is aging. Every year he gets weaker and more frail. And this is terrible news in Skavendom, where weakness is usually sifted out of, government at the end of a knife. In his prime, Critic was fast and strong and cunning like all the Claw Lords, but now he's faltering. He's not the kind of Claw Lord that's going to go ride a beast and go pick a fight with a Stormcast hand-to-hand. He's past that. When he gets himself into a bind, one where he just doesn't have the physical might to survive, he taps into that demon weapon for power. Now, the Foul Blade itself is a demon. It has an immense amount of power in it. It blesses the wielder and that kind of stuff. But essentially, in exchange for time off of his sentence as a sword, being trapped inside the sword, the demon will give Critic a measure of his power. So, for example, the Eshin assassin comes, maybe there's a small skirmish in a fight, and Critic's realizing, I can't beat this guy, I need an edge. He will activate the sword, and him and the demon will yell at each other, make a deal on how, much time is being taken off his sentence. Once an agreement is reached, Critic gets the power, kills the assassin. But the issue is, we don't know how long of a sentence the Vermin Lord has in the sword, or how much remains of that sentence, because Critic's been using it here and there. But there's a real tension within the character, and that's what I think is really interesting about him, right? The most frugal of all Skaven now has to survive by, if you'll excuse the expression, penny pinching the moments and charges left of his demon weapon. Because once that runs out, first off, that Vermin Lord, if it doesn't immediately come out of the sword and kill him, is going to be mad. But even if the Vermin Lord has to go away and like recoalesce or something like that, the other Skaven around him, they're going to kill him. And so it's this fascinating emblem of his power and a testament to how awesome he is, but it's also a crutch, and one with a very limited lifespan. Now, that's really all the lore that we get regarding Critic Foulblade outside of books that I hope are coming one day. So let's take a step back and ask the question, why is this cool? Was he really deserving of his own model, of a dude to be made out of nowhere? The answer is absolutely, because we need more demon weapons and we need more Claw Lords. Actually, I think, joking aside, Critic is a fantastic example of subtle, interesting character writing on the part of GW, right? It's easy to have these big, knockout characters like Solstin Prime, where you just say, this is the biggest, baddest, most important dude ever. And there's nothing else like him, and there's no one even near him, and he's totally unknowable. But then there's that other kind of hero where you look at Critic and you're like, not only do I know what Claw Lords are, I know why you're different. And I know why you've had a different outcome because of those subtle things, right? Frugality doesn't sound like a superpower until you give it into the mind of a megalomaniac warlord bent on destruction. So I guess instead of like having these larger than life characters, I enjoy when there's a small hero that has a subtle difference that highlights both the role that they are excelling in this case a Claw Lord, why is he better than other Claw Lords, but that also gives us insight into a unique story of how we got there. He could have just been Critic, I don't know, Claw Main or something like that, a good frugal leader of the Skaven, and we all like him, and he's a Claw Lord with special abilities. But adding the whole story, backstory rather, regarding the Foulblade, the demon weapon, which have just been a part of Warhammer lore for forever, is fantastic. It, first of all, brings in the other new character to the book, Vizek Scour, into the backstory, which is fun. And those little details of just, he got this awesome sword by backstabbing a Vermin Lord, that is a one-sentence synopsis that, would make every Skaven pee themselves. And again, it's done so easily, or at least represented so easily on the model. It just tells this incredible story, and I absolutely love it. I'm so interested to hear more from Critic Foulblade, whether it's through campaign books or, again, ideally a Black Library novel. I don't know. But I would love to hear your thoughts. What do you feel about the backstory connection? I would love to see other Claw Lords, not necessarily named ones, but what are some other, we'll say, benign personality traits that if you put them on a Claw Lord, make them exceptionally deadly, like frugality we mentioned before. I think about those. So I would love to hear your thoughts down below. Tell me what you think of Critic, as well as the idea of GW having, introducing characters that have a back and forth in their background with other characters. There's not a lot of that, actually, in Age of Sigmar, but I'm hoping to see more and more of it. So let me know in the comments down below, and I will catch you next time. Happy wargaming, friends.